Hello, friends. Welcome to the Sleep Aliens. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. You've heard the stories. The unusual lights in the sky, objects moving in ways that defy the laws of physics, witnesses swearing they saw something impossible. But what if these witnesses aren't ordinary people or excited tourists? What if military personnel are using the world's most comprehensive radar systems in the most isolated places on Earth? The North Pole is a place where mistakes are not forgiven. It allows for no hallucinations or hysteria. When you're on duty in a place where the sun doesn't rise for months and where temperatures can kill you in minutes, your senses become heightened. You become sensitive to every movement, every sound, and every anomaly. Because there, an anomaly could be the difference between life and death. Captain Morgan Hale learned this in the winter of 2019. When you hear what happened at Arctic Station Echo, you'll understand better why some questions remain unanswered. Captain Morgan Hale had been stationed at Arctic Station Echo for 8 months when the first incident occurred. 8 months of endless darkness, howling winds, and a kind of silence that pressed against your eardrums until you thought you'd go mad. The station itself was nothing impressive. A collection of prefabricated buildings huddled together on a wind-scraped plateau in northern Alaska, roughly 60 miles from the nearest settlement. Its sole purpose was to monitor airspace, track potential threats, and maintain a constant vigil over one of the most strategically important regions on the planet. Hale was good at his job. 38 years old, 15 years in the Air Force, with a service record that read like a textbook example of military excellence. He'd flown combat missions in the Middle East, served as an instructor at Nellis Air Force Base, and volunteered for Arctic duty specifically because he wanted a challenge. What he got was months of staring at radar screens in a frozen wasteland, drinking bad coffee, and wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake. But that night, everything changed. It started with Staff Sergeant Tyler Kovac, the radar technician on duty. Kovac was 26, fresh-faced, and still enthusiastic about military service in a way that made the older personnel shake their heads. He'd been monitoring the AN/FPS-117 long-range surveillance radar, a beast of a machine capable of tracking objects hundreds of miles away, when something unusual appeared on his screen. "Captain Hale, sir, I've got something weird here." Kovac's voice crackled through the intercom, tinged with confusion rather than alarm. Hale set down his coffee and walked from his small office into the radar control room. The space was dimly lit, illuminated primarily by the glow of multiple screens displaying green and black radar returns. The walls hummed with the constant thrum of electronics. Outside, the wind screamed across the tundra, rattling the windows. "What am I looking at, Sergeant?" Hale leaned over Kovac's shoulder, studying the screen. "Right there, sir. Bearing 270, range approximately 40 miles. Kovac pointed at a contact that appeared and disappeared with each sweep of the radar. "It's been there for about 5 minutes. Intermittent returns, but consistent enough that I don't think it's weather." Hale watched the screen carefully. The contact would appear for 2 or 3 sweeps, vanish for 1, then reappear. Its altitude reading was erratic, one moment showing 8,000 feet, the next showing 20,000, then dropping back down. The speed was equally inconsistent, fluctuating between stationary and moving at over 500 knots. "Could be atmospheric ducting," Hale suggested, though his tone suggested he didn't quite believe it. Atmospheric ducting occurred when radar signals bent in unusual ways due to temperature inversions, creating false contacts or making distant objects appear closer than they were. It was common in the Arctic. But this contact's behavior was too regular, too persistent. "I considered that, sir, but look at the pattern." Kovac pulled up the last 15 minutes of recorded data. "It's moving in a circular pattern, clockwise. The radius is consistent, about 5 miles. If it was ducting, we'd expect more randomness." Hale studied the pattern. The sergeant was right. Whatever was out there was moving in deliberate circles, like something conducting a survey or performing a holding pattern. He reached for the radio. "Rodriguez, you got anything on comms? Any aircraft squawking in that area?" Airman, First Class Rodriguez, stationed in the communications center down the hall, responded immediately. "Negative, Captain. No transponder signals, no radio traffic, nothing scheduled in that sector according to the flight plan database." "Run it again. Check with Elmendorf, see if they've got anything we don't know about." "Roger that, sir." Hale turned back to the radar screen. The contact continued its circular pattern, steady and methodical. He felt a familiar tension building in his chest, the same feeling he'd had in combat when something wasn't quite right, when the enemy was close but hadn't revealed themselves yet. "Keep tracking it," he told Kovac. "Log everything. I'm going to check the weather data." For the next hour, Hale cross-referenced every possible explanation he could think of. Weather balloons? None scheduled in the area. Commercial aircraft off course? Negative. Military exercises? None reported. He even checked for unusual solar activity that might affect the radar systems. Everything came back normal, except the contact was still there. By midnight, the circular pattern had shifted. The object, and Hale was now thinking of it as an object rather than an anomaly, had moved closer to the station. It was now roughly 20 miles out, still circling, still maintaining that impossible pattern of appearing and disappearing. "Captain, I'm picking up something else." Kovac's voice had lost its earlier enthusiasm. Now he just sounded unsettled. "Multiple contacts, same bearing, but they're smaller. Like the primary target is, I don't know, releasing something." Hale watched as the radar screen populated with additional returns. Small objects moving independently but maintaining formation with the larger contact. They moved with precision, adjusting their positions relative to each other with mathematical accuracy. "How many?" Hale asked. 4, no, 5. Wait, there's a 6th one. They're arranging themselves in a pattern." Kovac traced the screen with his finger. "Sir, they're forming a perfect hexagon around the primary contact." The temperature in the control room seemed to drop. Hale had seen a lot of strange things on radar over the years. He'd tracked ballistic missiles, hypersonic test vehicles, even a falling satellite once. But he'd never seen anything organize itself with this kind of geometric precision. "Rodriguez, still nothing on comms," Hale called out. "Nothing, sir. Elmendorf confirms no known traffic in that sector. They're asking if we need assistance." "Negative. Tell them we're investigating. Keep them updated." Hale made a decision. "Sergeant, I'm going outside. I want eyes-on confirmation." Kovac looked up from his screen, surprised. "Sir, it's 40 below out there, and if this thing is 20 miles away, I know the range, Sergeant, but if there's something out there and it's that close, maybe we can see it. The aurora's been active tonight. Visibility should be decent." What Hale didn't say was that he needed to see for himself. Needed to confirm that this wasn't just a radar glitch or some electronic phenomenon he didn't understand. Something in his gut told him that whatever was out there was real, and that it deserved more than just passive observation. He grabbed his parka from the hook by the door, pulled on insulated gloves, and wound a thermal face mask around his head. The standard Arctic survival gear that everyone stationed at Echo wore religiously, because stepping outside without it could mean frostbite within minutes. The door opened with a hydraulic hiss, and the cold hit him like a physical blow. Even with all his gear, the Arctic night was punishing. The wind cut through layers of insulation, found every gap, every weakness. His breath crystallized instantly, forming clouds that froze onto his face mask. But the sky was magnificent. The aurora borealis rippled overhead in sheets of green and violet, curtains of light that danced and swirled as charged particles from the solar wind collided with Earth's atmosphere. The phenomenon was common this far north, especially during the winter months, but Hale never grew tired of watching it. There was something hypnotic about those lights, something ancient and unknowable. He trudged away from the station's buildings, his boots crunching on ice-hardened snow. The radar mast rose behind him, a skeletal tower festooned with antennae and equipment, red warning lights blinking rhythmically. He wanted to get clear of the station's lights, away from any potential interference with his vision. The plateau stretched out before him, an endless expanse of white broken only by the occasional rock outcropping. The horizon was barely distinguishable from the sky, both merging into a gradient of deep blue and black. No moon tonight, just the stars, thousands of them, brilliant and sharp in the crystalline air, and the aurora. Hale oriented himself toward the bearing 270, roughly west-northwest. He pulled out a pair of military-grade night vision binoculars from his parka and raised them to his eyes. The world turned green, the aurora intensifying into blazing rivers of light. For a moment, he saw nothing unusual, just the endless Arctic landscape, the aurora, the stars. Then he noticed it. At first, he thought it was just a particularly bright section of aurora, but the aurora moved in waves, in flowing patterns. This light was different. It was steady, circular, and it was in exactly the right position to correspond with the radar contact. Hale adjusted the focus on his binoculars, his hands trembling slightly from cold or excitement, he wasn't sure. The light resolved into something more defined. It wasn't a single point, but rather a ring, a perfect circle of luminescence hovering in the sky. The color was difficult to describe, not quite white, not quite blue, but something in between. It pulsed gently, a slow rhythm like breathing. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, his breath fogging the binocular lenses. As he watched, the ring began to move. Not quickly, but with deliberate purpose, it maintained its circular shape, rotating slowly as it drifted across the sky. And around it, just as the radar had shown, were smaller lights. 6 of them, positioned at equal intervals around the central ring, forming that perfect hexagon. They moved in unison, a synchronized dance that no conventional aircraft could perform. No acceleration, no deceleration. Just smooth, continuous motion that seemed to defy inertia itself. Hale lowered the binoculars and stared with his naked eyes. Even without magnification, he could see them now. The ring and its accompanying lights were bright enough to be visible against the aurora, distinct and undeniable. His radio crackled. "Captain Hale, sir, the contacts are changing behavior." Kovac's voice was tight with tension. "They're all converging on a single point. Range is, sir, they're getting closer to us. 15 miles now, altitude dropping. They're descending." Hale raised the binoculars again. The ring was indeed descending, losing altitude as it continued its approach. The smaller lights maintained their formation, following the primary contact down. He could see more detail now. The ring wasn't solid, but seemed to be composed of individual segments, like a chain of lights connected by something invisible. The spaces between the segments flickered with that same blue-white luminescence. "I have visual confirmation," Hale said into his radio, his voice steadier than he felt. "Whatever's on our radar is real. I'm looking at it right now." There was a pause on the other end. "Sir, should I contact Elmendorf, request an intercept?" Hale considered it. Launch fighters to investigate an unidentified aerial phenomenon. Standard procedure for any potential threat to North American airspace. But something stopped him. Maybe it was professional curiosity. Maybe it was the realization that whatever he was looking at was so far beyond conventional aircraft that fighters would be useless. Or maybe it was something else entirely, a sense that this moment was important, that initiating hostility would be the wrong move. "Not yet," he replied. "Keep tracking, record everything, but no contact with Elmendorf unless I give the order." "Roger that, sir." The lights continued their descent. Hale estimated they were now at approximately 5,000 feet and still dropping. The ring's rotation had slowed, and the hexagonal formation of smaller lights had begun to pulse in sequence, each one brightening and dimming in turn like some kind of signal. Were they communicating? And if so, with whom? Hale swept his binoculars across the sky, searching for any other anomalies. The aurora continued its dance overhead, indifferent to the drama unfolding below. The stars maintained their vigil. Nothing else seemed out of place, except for one thing. Far to the north, near the horizon, he caught a glimpse of something else. Another light much smaller than the ring, moving rapidly from east to west. It appeared for just a moment, then vanished behind a bank of clouds. "Kovac, you picking up anything else? Northern sector, low altitude?" "Stand by, sir." A pause. "Negative. Nothing on that bearing. Just the main contacts." Hale frowned. Either his eyes were playing tricks on him, entirely possible in these conditions, or there was something out there that the radar wasn't seeing. Neither option was comforting. The ring was now roughly 10 miles away and had leveled off at what Hale estimated to be 3,000 feet. It had stopped its approach and resumed its circular pattern, though the radius of the circle was smaller now. The hexagonal lights maintained their positions, still pulsing in sequence. Hale stood in the Arctic night, watching lights that shouldn't exist perform maneuvers that shouldn't be possible, and felt the weight of the moment settle onto his shoulders. 15 years in the Air Force, countless hours of training, multiple combat deployments. None of it had prepared him for this. The radio crackled again. "Captain, the contacts just disappeared, all of them. They're gone from radar." Kovac sounded confused and a little frightened. "Sir, they didn't fade out. They just vanished. One sweep they were there, the next sweep nothing." Hale kept his binoculars trained on the position where the lights had been. For several seconds he saw nothing, just empty sky and the aurora. Then, just as Kovac had described, the lights simply vanished. Not gradually. Not by flying away. They were there and then they weren't. The Arctic night returned to its normal state of frozen silence. "Confirmed," Hale said quietly. "Visual contact lost. Return to normal monitoring protocols." He stood there for a few more minutes, scanning the sky, hoping they might reappear. But the phenomenon had ended as abruptly as it had begun. Whatever those lights had been, whatever had brought them to this remote corner of Alaska, they were gone now. Or were they? As Hale trudged back toward the station, his mind raced through possibilities. Natural phenomenon? He'd never heard of any atmospheric condition that produced geometric patterns like that. Secret military technology? Possible. But why would they test it so close to a monitoring station without warning the personnel? Foreign intrusion. Russian or Chinese aircraft. The technology he'd witnessed was so far beyond anything he knew of that it seemed unlikely. That left one possibility he didn't want to consider. But as he reached the door to the station and prepared to step back into the warmth, he allowed himself to think it, just for a moment. What if they weren't ours? What if they weren't anyone's? The incident report took Hale 3 hours to write. Every detail had to be precise, every observation documented, every piece of radar data cross-referenced with the visual sightings. He knew this report would be read by people far above his pay grade, people who would scrutinize every word for signs of incompetence or mental instability. The problem was that no matter how carefully he worded it, the facts remained incredible. An unidentified aerial phenomenon had approached the station, performed maneuvers that violated known principles of aerodynamics, and then vanished without a trace. The radar logs confirmed everything. The recorded data showed the contacts, their movements, their sudden disappearance. There was no ambiguity. By morning, Hale had submitted the report through proper channels and sent copies to Elmendorf Air Force Base, NORAD, and the North American Aerospace Defense Command. He'd marked it as priority traffic, which ensured it would be read quickly. He'd also marked it as classified, which ensured that very few people would read it at all. Sergeant Kovac had spent the night reviewing the radar recordings, running diagnostics on the equipment, checking for any possible explanation for what they'd seen. He found nothing wrong with the systems. No glitches, no malfunctions, no interference. The data was solid. Rodriguez had scoured the communication logs, listening to hours of radio traffic searching for any indication of aircraft in the area. He found nothing. No transponder signals, no voice communications, no electronic emissions of any kind. Whatever had been out there either didn't use radio or didn't want to be heard. As dawn broke over Station Echo, though dawn was a generous term for the brief period of twilight that passed for daylight in January, Hale stood at the window of his office, drinking coffee and staring out at the frozen landscape. The aurora had faded with the arrival of morning light, and the sky had turned a deep blue-gray. He thought about the lights, the perfect geometry of their formation, the way they moved with such precision and purpose, and that ring, that beautiful, impossible ring of light hovering in the Arctic sky. His phone rang, the satellite line, which meant someone important wanted to talk to him. Captain Hale speaking. Captain, this is Colonel Richards, NORAD. I've just read your incident report from last night. Hale straightened unconsciously, adopting a more formal posture, even though Richards couldn't see him. Yes, sir. Everything in that report is accurate. We have multiple witnesses and recorded radar data to support the observations. I don't doubt your accuracy, Captain. That's not why I'm calling. Richards paused. I'm calling because your report is the third one we've received in the last 6 weeks describing similar phenomena in the Arctic region, and I think you need to know about the others. Colonel Richards' words hung in the cold air of Hale's office like a physical presence. 3 reports. 6 weeks. Similar phenomena. The implications were staggering, and Hale felt his pulse quicken despite his training to remain calm under pressure. What kind of phenomena, sir? Hale asked, gripping the phone tighter. That's classified beyond your current clearance level, Captain. But I can tell you this, you're not crazy, and your equipment isn't malfunctioning. Whatever you saw last night has been seen before, and it's being taken very seriously at the highest levels. Richard's voice carried a weight that suggested he'd seen the reports himself, that he'd wrestled with the same questions Hale was now facing. I'm authorizing an upgrade to your observation protocols. You'll be receiving new equipment within 72 hours, enhanced optical tracking systems, infrared cameras, electromagnetic field sensors. If this happens again, we want every piece of data we can get. Sir, should I brief my personnel, they deserve to know, brief them on the new protocols only. Do not discuss the other incidents. That information remains compartmentalized. And Captain? Richards paused. Keep your eyes on the sky. Something tells me you haven't seen the last of those lights. The line went dead. Hale set down the phone and stared at the wall of his office. 3 reports, which meant at least 3 other military installations or monitoring stations had encountered the same thing. How many more incidents had gone unreported? How many commercial pilots or civilian witnesses had seen something but stayed silent, afraid of ridicule or professional consequences? He thought about the ring of light, the geometric precision of those smaller objects, the way they'd simply vanished from existence. And he thought about that brief glimpse he'd caught of another light far to the north, the one that hadn't shown up on radar. What if whatever was out there didn't want to be detected? What if it only appeared on radar when it chose to? The next 72 hours passed slowly at Station Echo. Hale maintained normal operations, continuing to monitor the airspace, filing routine reports. But everyone at the station felt it, that sense of anticipation, that waiting for something to happen. Kovac jumped at shadows. Rodriguez kept his radio tuned to emergency frequencies, listening for any chatter about unusual sightings. The maintenance crew began checking the perimeter more frequently, though they couldn't have explained what they were looking for. The new equipment arrived on schedule, delivered by a C-130 transport that landed on Echo's ice runway during one of the few hours of twilight. The crew who unloaded the crates wore uniforms without insignia and spoke to no one. They installed the equipment with mechanical efficiency. 3 infrared cameras with overlapping fields of view, a portable electromagnetic sensor array, and what appeared to be a sophisticated optical tracking system with automatic recording capabilities. When they finished, the team leader, a woman in her 30s with ice blue eyes and a Nordic accent, handed Hale a sealed envelope. "Instructions are inside," she said curtly. "Follow them exactly. And Captain," she leaned closer, her voice dropping, "whatever you do, don't try to communicate with them. Just observe and record. That's all anyone wants from you." Before Hale could ask who them referred to, she was gone, climbing back into the C-130. 10 minutes later, the aircraft was airborne, disappearing into the gray Arctic sky. Hale opened the envelope and read the instructions. They were simple enough. Activate all recording systems at the first sign of anomalous activity, maintain continuous observation, transmit data via secure satellite uplink in real time. But it was the final paragraph that caught his attention. Under no circumstances should station personnel attempt physical approach or radio contact with any unidentified aerial phenomena. Maintain minimum safe distance of 5 nautical miles. In the event of UAP approach within this perimeter, personnel should shelter in place and await further instructions. UAP, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, the official term that had replaced UFO in military parlance, carrying less cultural baggage but no less mystery. Hale briefed his team on the new protocols. They received the information with a mixture of relief and apprehension, relief that their observations were being taken seriously, apprehension about what might come next. "Sir, can I ask something?" Rodriguez spoke up, his young face creased with worry. "That stuff about maintaining distance. Are these things dangerous?" Hale chose his words carefully. "I don't know, Airman, but whoever sent us this equipment thinks we need to be careful. So we're going to be careful. Clear?" "Crystal, sir." But the days passed, and nothing happened. The radar screens remained empty except for routine traffic. The skies above Station Echo showed only stars and aurora, clouds and darkness. Hale found himself checking the monitors constantly, studying every contact, analyzing every data point. But there was nothing. It was almost disappointing. Dr. Ingrid Sorensen had always been skeptical of unexplained phenomena. As an atmospheric physicist specializing in Arctic ionospheric research, she'd spent 15 years studying the upper atmosphere, the aurora borealis, and the complex interactions between solar radiation and Earth's magnetic field. She'd seen spectacular natural phenomena, optical illusions that could fool even trained observers, and equipment malfunctions that created false data. She'd investigated dozens of UFO sightings that turned out to be weather balloons, aircraft contrails illuminated at odd angles, or simple misidentifications of Venus. So, when Lieutenant Commander Sarah Millbrook, a British liaison officer stationed at Thule, contacted her about unusual electromagnetic readings at the base, Sorensen's first instinct was to find a mundane explanation. Thule Air Base sat on the northwest coast of Greenland, roughly 750 miles north of the Arctic Circle. It was one of the northernmost military installations on Earth, built during the Cold War as an early warning station for potential Soviet missile attacks. Now it served as a crucial node in the global network of space surveillance and missile warning systems, its massive radar arrays constantly scanning the skies for threats. Sorensen had been working at Thule for 3 months, conducting research on how solar storms affected radio communications in polar regions. Her equipment was set up in a small laboratory adjacent to the main radar facility, and she'd grown accustomed to the base's routine: the constant hum of electronics, the bitter cold, the isolation. But Millbrook's message was different. Unusual electromagnetic readings, equipment interference, and something else the commander had mentioned on the secure phone line: visual anomalies reported by multiple personnel. Sorensen bundled herself in Arctic gear and made her way across the frozen compound to the radar facility. The wind cut through her layers with ease, and she hunched against it, moving as quickly as the ice would allow. The base's buildings were connected by heated tunnels, but the radar facility stood separate, requiring an outdoor walk that Sorensen never enjoyed. Millbrook met her at the entrance, her breath frosting in the air. The British officer was 42, career military, with the kind of precise manner that came from years of dealing with classified information and high-stakes situations. Dr. Sorensen, thank you for coming so quickly." Millbrook gestured for her to follow. "I want to show you something before I explain. I think you need to see the data first, without any preconceptions." They entered the facility's control room, a space similar to Station Echo's radar center but larger, more sophisticated. Multiple operators sat at consoles, monitoring various systems. The walls were lined with screens displaying everything from weather patterns to satellite tracking data. Millbrook led Sorensen to a secondary workstation away from the main operations area. She pulled up a data file on the computer, and Sorensen leaned in to study it. "This is from our electromagnetic monitoring system," Millbrook explained. "We use it to track solar radiation, cosmic rays, that sort of thing. 3 days ago, we started picking up anomalies. Look at this spike here." Sorensen examined the graph. It showed electromagnetic field measurements over time, with clear peaks and valleys representing normal variation. But there, at 22:14 hours 3 days prior, was a massive spike, orders of magnitude beyond normal readings. "Could be a solar flare," Sorensen suggested, though the spike's shape bothered her. Solar flares had a characteristic signature: a gradual build and decay. This spike was too sharp, too localized. "That's what I thought," Millbrook said. "But look at the timing. It coincides exactly with the visual sighting by one of our perimeter patrols. And it happened again yesterday at 1:33 hours, and again this morning at 11:47, always accompanied by visual confirmation." Sorensen felt a familiar tingle of scientific curiosity. Patterns meant something. Repetition meant causation, not coincidence. What did they see? Millbrook pulled up a different file. Incident reports from base security. Sorensen read through them quickly, her skepticism warring with the evidence before her. First sighting. Security patrol observed a bright object, hovering approximately 2 miles northeast of the base. Object displayed structured appearance with distinct edges. Duration of observation, 7 minutes. Object departed at high speed, accelerating in a manner inconsistent with conventional aircraft. Second sighting. Different patrol, same general location. Object described as disc-shaped with central protrusion. Multiple colored lights observed. Object performed impossible maneuvers, including instantaneous direction changes and vertical acceleration. Duration, 12 minutes. Third sighting observed from the base's control tower. Object appeared as a metallic sphere reflecting sunlight. Remained stationary for approximately 5 minutes before splitting into multiple smaller objects that dispersed in different directions. Sorensen set down the reports and looked at Millbrook. "You're telling me that every time your electromagnetic sensors go crazy, someone sees something in the sky. Not just something, the same something, or variations of it. And, Dr. Sorensen, there's more." Millbrook's expression was grave. "We've been in contact with other installations. NORAD forwarded us classified briefings about similar incidents at various Arctic stations. This isn't an isolated phenomenon. It's happening across the entire polar region." The implications slowly sank in. Multiple bases, multiple witnesses, corroborating electromagnetic data. This wasn't mass hysteria or equipment malfunction. This was real, whatever this was. "I need to see your raw data," Sorensen said, her scientific training taking over. "All of it, EM readings, radar logs, weather conditions, everything. And I want to interview the witnesses myself." "Already arranged," Millbrook said. "But there's one more thing you should know. This morning's sighting? One of our personnel took photographs." She pulled up a series of images on the screen, and Sorensen felt her breath catch. The photographs showed the Greenland sky, gray and overcast. But there, clear as day, was an object. It was spherical, or nearly so, with a slight flattening at the top and bottom. Its surface appeared metallic but didn't reflect light in the way normal metal would. Instead, it seemed to absorb and redistribute the light, creating an almost liquid appearance. Around the equator of the sphere were evenly spaced protrusions, possibly ports or sensors or something else entirely. And most strikingly, the object was surrounded by a faint halo of light, a corona that shifted colors between frames, blue, then green, then a color that Sorensen couldn't quite name, something between violet and silver. "These are authentic?" Sorensen asked, though she could already see they were. The image quality, the lighting, the way the object interacted with the background, all consistent with genuine photography. "Shot on a standard digital camera by Airman Hassan, one of our communications specialists. He was on break, stepped outside for some air, and there it was. He took 8 photos before it vanished." Millbrook zoomed in on the object. "Notice anything unusual about the way it disappeared?" Sorensen studied the final photographs. The object was there in one frame. Then, in the next frame, there was nothing. Not a blur, not a streak, not even a distortion of the background. It had simply ceased to be present, as if someone had erased it from reality. "That's impossible," Sorensen whispered, though saying it aloud made her feel foolish. She was looking at photographic evidence of the impossible. "Physics doesn't work that way," she continued, more to herself than to Millbrook. "Objects don't just vanish. They move. They accelerate. They leave some trace of their passage. Even if this thing had some kind of cloaking technology, there would be distortion, refraction of light around it. But this, she gestured at the screen, this is like it stopped existing. Which brings us to why I called you, Millbrook said. You're the physicist. You're the one who studies atmospheric phenomena and electromagnetic interactions. If there's a natural explanation for this, you're the person who can find it. And if there isn't... She let the sentence hang. Sorensen spent the next 6 hours buried in data. She cross-referenced the electromagnetic spikes with solar activity. No correlation. She checked for seismic events that might generate unusual EM fields. Nothing. She analyzed the atmospheric conditions during each sighting. Stable, clear, no anomalies. She even considered the possibility of high-altitude plasma phenomena, ball lightning, or other rare atmospheric events. None of it fit. The witnesses were consistent in their descriptions. The objects moved with purpose, not random drift. They responded to being observed, changing behavior when personnel approached. They displayed technology or capabilities that exceeded anything in the public record of human achievement. By evening, Sorensen had to admit what her scientific training resisted. This was not a natural phenomenon. This was technology. But whose? She was reviewing the photographs again when her phone rang. The secure line. Dr. Sorensen, this is Captain Morgan Hale from Arctic Station Echo in Alaska. The voice on the other end sounded tired but determined. Colonel Richards gave me your number. He said you might be experiencing similar phenomena to what we observed in January. Sorensen sat up straighter. You saw them too? A ring of light. Geometric formation. Perfect coordination. Disappeared without a trace. Hale's words came quickly, as if he'd been waiting months to talk to someone who would understand. And the electromagnetic readings. We picked up the same spikes. Dr. Sorensen, what the hell are we dealing with here? I don't know, she admitted. But I think we need to find out. Can you send me your data? All of it? Already transmitted. Should be in your system now. A pause. Doctor, there's something else. Something I didn't put in my official report because it sounds insane. But that night, when I was outside watching those lights, I got this feeling. Like they knew I was there. Like they were aware of me watching them. Have any of your witnesses mentioned anything similar? Sorensen thought about the reports, the way multiple observers had noted the object's behavior changing when personnel approached. Yes, she said quietly. They have. Then we're not dealing with drones or satellites or any kind of automated system. There's intelligence behind this. Conscious decision-making. Hale's voice carried a note of something Sorensen couldn't quite identify. Fear, perhaps, or awe. The question is, what does it want? That question kept Sorensen awake for most of the night. She lay in her quarters, listening to the wind howl across the frozen Greenland landscape, and thought about lights in the sky, about objects that defied physics, about intelligence that might not be human. She'd spent her entire career studying the natural world, trusting in mathematics and observation to explain everything she encountered. But now she faced something that fell outside those comfortable boundaries, something that challenged the very foundations of what she thought she knew about reality. At 03:17 hours, she got her answer. The alarm in her room shrieked to life. The emergency klaxon that meant something urgent was happening. She threw on her clothes and ran for the radar facility, her breath forming clouds in the pre-dawn darkness. The control room was chaos. Multiple operators shouting coordinates, radar screens lit up with contacts, Millbrook barking orders into a radio. Sorensen pushed her way to a monitor and stared at what she was seeing. The sky above Thule Air Base was full of them. Dozens of contacts, all displaying the same impossible flight characteristics. They moved in formation, then dispersed, then reformed, They climbed to altitudes that should have left contrails but didn't. They accelerated at speeds that would have generated sonic booms but produced no sound at all. "Get me visual confirmation," Millbrook shouted. "Someone tell me what's out there." Sorensen ran to the window. Through the thick glass, she could see the base's exterior lights, the radar towers, the frozen tundra beyond. And above it all, dancing across the dark sky like some cosmic ballet, were the lights. They came in different sizes and configurations. Some were spherical, like the one in the photographs. Others were elongated, cigar-shaped. A few matched Hale's description, rings of light with smaller objects in formation around them. They moved with fluid grace, weaving between each other without colliding, maintaining perfect spacing and coordination. And they were descending. "Commander, the contacts are losing altitude," one of the operators called out. "Multiple objects now below 5,000 feet and continuing descent." "Are they hostile?" someone asked. "How the hell should I know?" Millbrook snapped back. She turned to Sorensen. "Doctor, what do your instruments show?" Sorensen checked her portable EM sensor, which she'd grabbed from her lab on the way to the control room. The readings were off the scale. Electromagnetic radiation was flooding the area, but not in any pattern she recognized. It wasn't radio frequency, wasn't microwave, wasn't any part of the spectrum she knew. It was something else, something her equipment was detecting but couldn't classify. "I'm reading massive electromagnetic activity," she reported. "But it's not matching any known signature. It's like they're operating in frequencies we don't normally measure." One of the lights, a large spherical object perhaps 50 meters in diameter, descended to roughly 1,000 feet above the base's main runway. It hovered there, perfectly stationary despite the strong winds that should have buffeted it. Smaller objects arranged themselves around it in a pattern that Sorensen's brain immediately recognized, a three-dimensional geometric formation, each object positioned at the vertex of an invisible polyhedron. "They're showing us something," Sorensen said aloud, not caring if anyone thought she was crazy. "That formation, it's mathematical, deliberate. They're demonstrating their capabilities. Or their superiority," Millbrook added grimly. "We've scrambled fighters from our rapid response team. ETA 15 minutes. Commander, I don't think that's wise." "I don't care what you think, Doctor. Those objects are in restricted airspace without authorization. If they don't respond to radio contact and can't identify themselves, we have protocols." But even as Millbrook spoke, her voice carried doubt. What good would fighters do against technology that could manipulate physics itself? The lights continued their display for another 7 minutes. They moved through increasingly complex formations, spirals, lattices, patterns that seemed to have no purpose other than to demonstrate impossible precision. Then, as quickly as they'd appeared, they began to ascend. One by one, the objects climbed back into the sky, accelerating vertically at speeds that would have crushed any human pilot. They rose until they were barely visible, tiny points of light against the darkness. Then, they were gone. The radar screens cleared. The electromagnetic readings dropped back to normal. The sky above Thule Air Base returned to its usual empty state, showing only stars and the faint glow of the aurora on the horizon. In the control room, nobody spoke for a long moment. What was there to say? They'd just witnessed something that shouldn't exist, and now it was gone, leaving behind only questions. Millbrook broke the silence. "Stand down the fighters. All personnel will submit detailed reports. Nothing leaves this base without my authorization. Dr. Sorensen, I want a complete analysis of your data within 24 hours. Sorensen nodded, still staring at the sky. Her hands were shaking, she realized, not from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of what she'd witnessed. Every assumption she'd made about the universe, every confident statement about the limits of technology and the nature of physics, all of it had just been challenged. She thought about Hale's question. What do they want? But maybe that wasn't the right question. Maybe the better question was, what are they trying to tell us? The secure video conference brought together personnel from across the Arctic monitoring network. Hale sat in his office at Station Echo, his face appearing on one of several screens visible to the participants. Sorensen was there from Thule, looking exhausted but intense. Colonel Richards attended from NORAD headquarters in Colorado. There were others, too. Officers from Canadian bases, scientists from research stations, intelligence analysts whose job titles were never specified. Richards opened the meeting with characteristic directness. Gentlemen, ladies, we have a situation. Over the past 3 months, we've documented 23 separate incidents of unidentified aerial phenomena across the Arctic region. These incidents share common characteristics: extreme performance capabilities, electromagnetic signatures that defy analysis, coordinated behavior suggesting intelligence, and consistent witness testimony from trained military personnel. This meeting is to establish what we know, what we don't know, and what we're going to do about it. A map appeared on screen, showing the Arctic Circle with red dots marking incident locations. The distribution was striking. The phenomena seemed to concentrate around military installations and research facilities, with particular focus on radar stations and electromagnetic monitoring sites. Captain Hale, your incident in January appears to be the first in this recent wave. Can you brief us on what you observed? Richards nodded at him. Hale ran through his account, keeping his voice steady and professional. He described the radar contacts, the visual observation, the geometric formations. When he finished, several other participants shared similar stories. A Danish station reported objects that matched the triangular beings from historical accounts. A Norwegian facility described massive spheres that released smaller craft. A Canadian base reported cylinder-shaped objects that moved through severe Arctic storms as if the weather didn't exist. The pattern was undeniable. Whatever these things were, they were conducting some kind of systematic survey or observation of human military installations across the entire polar region. Dr. Sorensen spoke up. Colonel, have we considered the possibility that these phenomena are connected to climate change? The Arctic is warming faster than anywhere else on Earth. Ice is melting, permafrost is thawing, methane is being released from the seafloor. Could these objects be monitoring environmental changes? An interesting theory, Doctor, Richards replied, but it doesn't explain the technology involved or why they're focusing specifically on military sites. If they're here to study climate, why not appear over civilian research stations or major cities? Unless they're studying us, another voice interjected. It belonged to a woman identified only as Agent Morrison from an unnamed intelligence agency, studying our capabilities, our response times, our technology, classic reconnaissance behavior. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed that implication. If these objects were conducting reconnaissance, it suggested preparation for something more significant. But preparation for what? There's another possibility we haven't discussed, Hale said carefully. What if they've always been here? What if we're only seeing them now because our detection capabilities have improved? Or because they want to be seen? Sorensen leaned forward on her screen. Captain Hale raises an important point. The Arctic has been largely inaccessible to human observation for most of history. Only in the last 70 years have we established permanent installations in these regions. We have no baseline for what's normal in Arctic skies. These phenomena might have been occurring for centuries, and we're only now in a position to document them. Richards nodded slowly. Which brings us to the key question. What do we do now? Do we attempt contact? Do we increase our surveillance? Do we go public with what we know? The discussion that followed lasted for over an hour. Various strategies were proposed and debated. Some argued for aggressive investigation, sending aircraft to intercept the objects, attempting radio contact, deploying teams to potential landing sites. Others advocated for passive observation, arguing that any overt action might be interpreted as hostile. In the end, the consensus was to continue enhanced monitoring while maintaining strict information security. All Arctic installations would receive upgraded detection equipment. Protocols would be established for responding to future incidents, but no public announcement would be made. No official acknowledgement that something extraordinary was happening in the polar regions. As the conference ended, Richards added one final instruction. Everyone on this call is now part of a working group. We'll have regular updates, share data in real time. And if anyone observes these phenomena again, you have standing authorization to record everything. We need to understand what we're dealing with, because sooner or later this situation is going to escalate, and when it does, I want us to be ready. The screens went dark. Hale sat alone in his office, thinking about lights in the sky and questions without answers. Outside his window, the Arctic night had returned, bringing with it the aurora, those familiar curtains of green and violet that suddenly seemed less certain, less natural than they had before. Somewhere out there, in the vast frozen darkness, something was watching. Something was waiting. The C-130 Hercules transport aircraft buffeted through turbulent air, its 4 turboprop engines straining against the Arctic storm. Inside the cargo bay, Captain Morgan Hale sat strapped into a canvas seat, surrounded by equipment crates and 3 other passengers who looked as uncomfortable as he felt. Dr. Ingrid Sorensen sat across from him, her face pale but determined. They'd been communicating for months since the conference call, sharing data and theories, building what had become an unlikely partnership between military pragmatism and scientific curiosity. Now they were finally meeting in person, though the circumstances were far from ideal. Next to Sorensen was Lieutenant Commander Millbrook, who'd insisted on accompanying the mission despite having no official reason to be there. And beside Hale sat a 4th passenger, a man in his 50s who'd introduced himself only as Dr. Reeves and claimed to be a consultant for the Defense Intelligence Agency. His presence made Hale uneasy, suggesting that whatever was happening had attracted attention from the intelligence community. 5 minutes to drop zone, the loadmaster shouted over the engine noise. Their destination was a remote monitoring station on St. Lawrence Island in the Bering Sea, roughly halfway between Alaska and Russia. The station had gone dark 4 hours ago. No radio contact, no data transmission, nothing. Standard protocol was to assume equipment failure and dispatch a maintenance crew, but the station's last transmission before going silent had included 3 words that changed everything. They're here. Multiple. Colonel Richards had ordered an immediate investigation team, pulling together whoever was closest and could reach the island quickly. That meant Hale from Station Echo, Sorensen from a research trip to Barrow, Millbrook from a liaison visit to Elmendorf, and the mysterious Dr. Reeves from wherever intelligence consultants materialized from. The C-130 began its descent through the storm, and Hale felt his stomach lurch. Through the small window, he could see nothing but darkness and swirling snow. The Bering Sea in November was unforgiving. If they had to ditch in the water, they'd have minutes before hypothermia killed them. The aircraft hit the ground hard, bounced once, then settled onto the ice runway. As the engines powered down, the loadmaster opened the rear cargo door, and Arctic wind screamed into the bay. "Welcome to St. Lawrence Island," he shouted over the wind. "Try not to freeze to death." They gathered their equipment and trudged through knee-deep snow toward a cluster of buildings barely visible through the blizzard. The monitoring station was small: living quarters for 6 personnel, a radar facility, a communications building, and a generator shed. Lights were on in the living quarters, which was a good sign. At least they had power. Hale pounded on the door. No response. He tried the handle. Unlocked. They pushed inside, grateful for the blast of warm air that greeted them. The interior was eerily normal: coffee mugs on a table, half-eaten meals in the kitchen, a jacket hung on a hook. But no people. "Hello?" Millbrook called out. "Anyone here? This is Lieutenant Commander Millbrook, RAF. We're the investigation team." Silence. They spread out, checking each room. The living quarters were empty. The bedrooms showed signs of recent occupation: unmade beds, personal items scattered about, but no personnel. It was as if everyone had simply vanished in the middle of their daily routine. "Check the radar facility," Hale ordered. "Maybe they're all in there." They crossed back into the storm, fighting their way to the radar building. This door was also unlocked. Inside, the equipment hummed with power, screens glowing, systems operational. But again, no people. Sorensen moved to a computer terminal and began pulling up logs. The radar was active up until 1522 hours, she reported. Then someone manually shut it down. No indication why. "Look at this," Reeves said from another console. He'd called up what appeared to be security camera footage. The timestamp showed 1519 hours, about 15 minutes before the station went dark. The footage showed the exterior of the station, the camera aimed at the space between buildings. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then one of the station personnel appeared, walking quickly toward the radar facility. He stopped abruptly, looking up at the sky. His body language changed, tense, alert. Another person emerged from the living quarters, then another. All 3 were staring at something above the camera's field of view. One of them pointed. They appeared to be speaking rapidly, though the security system had no audio. Then the footage did something impossible. It froze, not like a technical glitch, but as if time itself had stopped. The snow that had been falling hung motionless in the air. The personnel stood like statues, caught mid-gesture. The freeze lasted exactly 7 seconds by the timestamp. Then reality resumed, and the snow fell again. But the personnel were gone. The space between buildings was empty. "What the hell was that?" Millbrook whispered. Sorensen was frantically checking her electromagnetic sensors. "I'm reading residual EM radiation consistent with previous UAP encounters, but the levels are much higher. Whatever happened here, it was more intense than anything we've seen before." Hale felt cold that had nothing to do with the Arctic weather. They were taken. Those people were just taken. "We don't know that," Reeves said sharply. "There could be a rational explanation. Then where are they?" Hale shot back. "We've searched every building. There are no vehicles missing, no tracks in the snow leading away from the station. They didn't walk off into the storm, they vanished, and we all just watched it happen." Before anyone could respond, every piece of electronic equipment in the room suddenly came to life. Computers booted up, screens flickered, radar systems activated. The main display screen lit up with a radar image, and what they saw made everyone stop breathing. The sky above St. Lawrence Island was full of contacts. Dozens of them, arranged in a massive formation that stretched for miles. They hovered at various altitudes, from 500 feet to over 50,000, and they were all perfectly stationary, as if waiting for something. "Oh my God," Sorensen breathed. "It's not a surveillance operation, it's a fleet." The lights in the building flickered. Sorensen's EM sensors began screaming, their readings spiking off the charts. Through the window, they could see the storm outside beginning to change. The snow was still falling, but the wind had stopped. The air had taken on a strange quality, thick, heavy, charged with energy that made their skin prickle. And then they saw the light. It started as a faint glow on the horizon, barely visible through the storm. But it grew rapidly, spreading across the sky like dawn breaking in the middle of the night. The light was the same color Hale had seen over Station Echo, that impossible blue-white that didn't quite match any natural phenomenon. "Everyone outside now," Reeves ordered, his earlier skepticism replaced by urgency. "We need to document this." They burst out of the radar facility into a world transformed. The storm had stopped completely. The snow hung in the air, suspended, unmoving. The temperature had risen. Impossibly, it felt almost warm despite being the Arctic in November. And the sky was alive. The objects Hale had seen on radar were visible now, each one a point of light hanging in the darkness. But they were moving, descending slowly, deliberately. The formation was breathtaking, geometric perfection on a massive scale, each light positioned with mathematical precision relative to all the others. At the center of the formation was something larger. Not a sphere this time, not a disk or a ring. This was a structure, vast and complex, that seemed to fold in on itself in ways that hurt to look at. It appeared to exist in more than 3 dimensions, its edges and surfaces shifting and reconfiguring as it moved. Sorensen was frantically adjusting her equipment, trying to get readings, but her hands were shaking. "The electromagnetic field is off the scale. It's like they're manipulating space itself, bending it. That's why the snow isn't falling. They've created some kind of localized distortion in the gravitational field." The central structure descended until it was roughly 1,000 feet above the monitoring station. The smaller lights, hundreds of them now, arranged themselves around it in concentric spheres, each sphere rotating at a different speed, creating a hypnotic visual effect. And then, impossibly, they heard sound. Not sound in the traditional sense. This wasn't vibration traveling through air. This was something transmitted directly into their minds, bypassing their ears entirely. It was music, but not like any music created by humans. It was mathematical, precise, beautiful in an alien way that brought tears to Hale's eyes without him understanding why. "They're communicating," Sorensen said, her voice filled with wonder. "Not with words, with mathematics, with pure information. Can you feel it?" Hale could. It was as if knowledge was flowing directly into his brain, concepts and ideas that he couldn't quite grasp but somehow knew were important. He understood, in that moment, that what they were witnessing wasn't an invasion or a threat. It was an introduction. The lights had been coming to the Arctic for centuries, perhaps longer. They'd watched humanity develop, grow, spread across the planet. They'd waited patiently for the moment when humans would have both the technology to detect them and the wisdom to understand that detection didn't mean comprehension. And now, finally, they were revealing themselves. Not to the world wasn't ready. But to this small group of observers, military personnel and scientists who'd dedicated months to documenting the phenomena, who'd approached the mystery with both caution and curiosity. Images flooded Hale's mind. He saw Earth from space, saw the Arctic ice sheets from above, saw patterns of human activity spreading across the continents like a slow-motion explosion. He saw other worlds, other civilizations, other times. He understood with sudden clarity that humanity was not alone and never had been, that the universe was more crowded, more active, more interconnected than anyone had imagined. And he understood something else. Whatever these beings were, they were concerned. The Arctic was changing, the planet was changing, and humanity's response to these changes would determine whether Earth remained habitable not just for humans, but for all the complex systems of life that depended on stable climate. The lights weren't here to invade. They were here to observe, to document, and perhaps, if humanity proved capable of listening, to warn. The vision ended as abruptly as it had begun. Hale found himself on his knees in the snow, gasping for breath. Around him, the others were in similar states of shock. Sorensen with tears streaming down her face, Millbrook staring at the sky with an expression of awe, Reeves scribbling frantically in a notebook as if trying to capture the images before they faded. The lights began to ascend. The formation broke apart, each object moving independently now, spiraling upward in a complex dance. They climbed higher and higher, accelerating smoothly until they were just points of light against the stars. And then they were gone. The storm resumed as if it had never stopped. Snow began falling again, wind howling across the frozen landscape. The temperature plummeted back to its normal Arctic cold. Within seconds, the world had returned to normal, or at least to what passed for normal in this remote corner of the planet. "Did that really happen?" Millbrook asked, her voice small and uncertain. The equipment recorded it. Sorensen confirmed, checking her instruments with shaking hands. Every second. The EM readings, the visual data, all of it. This wasn't a hallucination. This was real. Reeves had stopped writing. He looked at the others with an expression Hale couldn't quite read. Fear, perhaps, or excitement, or both. "No one can know about this," he said quietly. "What we just witnessed, the world isn't ready. It would cause panic, chaos. Or it would give people hope," Sorensen countered. "Hope that we're not alone, that there's something more to existence than what we can see and measure." "Hope or panic, it doesn't matter," Hale said, finding his voice. "Because we're not the ones who decide. They are. They chose to reveal themselves to us specifically, at this specific time and place. They could appear over New York or Beijing or London any time they want. But they don't. They come here, to the Arctic, where only a handful of people will see them. That's deliberate. They're being careful." "Careful of what?" Millbrook asked. "Of us," Hale replied. "They're powerful enough to manipulate physics, to control space and time, to communicate directly with our minds. But they're still being cautious in their approach. That tells me they respect us, or fear us, or maybe both. It tells me they understand that first contact, real first contact, needs to happen gradually, carefully." A sound interrupted their conversation. A door opening. They spun around to see the 6 missing station personnel emerging from the living quarters, looking confused and disoriented. Where are we?" one of them asked. "We were outside looking at the lights and then—" "You don't remember?" Sorensen moved toward them, her scientific training overriding her shock. "What's the last thing you remember?" The personnel exchanged uncertain glances. "The lights came down," one woman said slowly. "We went outside to see them, and then, I don't know. It's like time skipped. One second we were outside, the next we were waking up in our bunks." They'd been gone for over 4 hours, but to them it had felt like seconds. Whatever the lights had done, whether it was an examination, a communication, or something else entirely, they'd been returned unharmed but with no memory of the experience. Hale made a decision. "Let's get everyone inside. Medical checks for the personnel. We need to document everything that happened here while it's still fresh. And someone needs to contact Colonel Richards. He's going to want a full report." As they shepherded the confused personnel into the warmth of the living quarters, Hale caught Sorensen's eye. She gave him a small nod of understanding. They both knew that tonight had changed everything. The months of observation, the careful documentation, the analysis, all of that had been preparation for this moment. First contact hadn't happened with the world watching. It had happened here in the Arctic darkness, witnessed by a handful of people who'd dedicated themselves to understanding the impossible. And now they carried the weight of that knowledge, the responsibility of deciding what to do with it. The debriefing lasted for 2 days. Every second of the St. Lawrence Island incident was analyzed, every piece of data examined, every witness statement recorded and cross-referenced. Colonel Richards flew in personally to oversee the process, along with a team of specialists whose credentials were never fully explained. Hale sat in his office, exhausted but unable to sleep. Through his window he could see the familiar Arctic landscape. Endless white tundra, dark sky, the aurora dancing on the horizon. It looked the same as it had before St. Lawrence Island, but Hale knew he would never see it the same way again. Dr. Sorensen appeared in his doorway, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Mind if I join you?" "Please." Hale gestured to the empty chair. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping coffee and watching the aurora. Finally, Sorensen spoke. "I've spent my entire career studying the atmosphere, measuring electromagnetic fields, analyzing data. I thought I understood how the universe worked. But now—" She shook her head. "Now I realize how little we actually know, how limited our perspective has been." "What do you think they wanted?" Hale asked. "Why reveal themselves now after all this time?" "I think they're worried," Sorensen said slowly. "The Arctic is the canary in the coal mine for climate change. The ice is melting faster than anyone predicted. Permafrost is releasing methane. The entire polar ecosystem is in crisis, and whatever those beings are, they've been watching for a long time. Maybe they're invested in Earth's well-being in ways we don't understand. Or maybe they're just curious," Haley suggested. "Maybe they study developing civilizations the way we study animals in the wild. We're reaching a critical point in our technological evolution. We can detect them now, communicate with them potentially. Maybe this is the moment they've been waiting for." Sorensen smiled slightly. "Both theories require us to believe in benevolent extraterrestrial intelligence. That's not very scientific of us." "Nothing about this is scientific in the traditional sense," Hale replied. "We're dealing with technology that violates our understanding of physics. Beings that can manipulate space-time, phenomena that shouldn't exist. At some point, we have to accept that our scientific framework might be incomplete." The door opened and Colonel Richards entered, followed by Dr. Reeves. The colonel looked grim. "Captain Hale, Dr. Sorensen, thank you for your patience during the debriefing process." Richards settled into a chair, his expression unreadable. "I'm here to inform you of the official determination regarding the St. Lawrence Island incident." Hale and Sorensen exchanged glances. This was it. The moment when the military bureaucracy decided how to classify what they'd witnessed, how to explain the unexplainable. "The incident will be classified at the highest level," Richards continued. "Your reports will be sealed, accessible only to a very small number of people with proper clearance. The 6 personnel from the monitoring station have been debriefed and reassigned to positions where their experience can be contextualized appropriately. The physical evidence, the electromagnetic readings, the video footage, the photographs, will be secured and analyzed by specialized teams. In other words, a cover-up," Sorensen said flatly. "In other words, responsible management of extraordinary information," Reeves corrected. "Dr. Sorensen, imagine what would happen if we released this publicly. The panic, the religious implications, the geopolitical consequences. Every nation would want access to this technology. Conspiracy theorists would have a field day, The social fabric would tear apart. Or people would unite in the face of something bigger than themselves, Sorensen argued. You're assuming the worst in humanity. I'm assuming reality, Reeves shot back. I've seen what happens when people are confronted with things they can't understand. It doesn't bring out the best in us. Richards held up a hand. Regardless of the philosophical debate, the decision has been made at levels far above my pay grade. This information stays classified. However, he looked at both Hale and Sorensen. Your work isn't finished. You're both being assigned to a new task force. Project Aurora, they're calling it. The mission is to continue monitoring UAP activity in the Arctic region, gathering data, documenting encounters. You'll have access to resources, personnel, cutting-edge equipment. And most importantly, you'll have the authority to investigate these phenomena properly. Hale felt a spark of hope. You're not shutting this down? Shutting it down would be pointless, Richards admitted. These objects are real. They're here, they're active. Ignoring them won't make them go away. But we can't announce their existence without understanding what they are, what they want, and how humanity should respond. That's what Project Aurora is for, to build that understanding, prepare for the day when contact becomes inevitable and public. How long do you think we have, Sorensen asked, before they decide to reveal themselves to everyone? Richards shrugged. Could be tomorrow, could be 100 years. But based on the pattern of activity we've seen, the increasing frequency of encounters, the growing boldness of their appearances, I'd say we have less time than anyone wants to believe. After Richards and Reeves left, Hale and Sorensen remained in the office, processing what they'd learned. They were being given a chance to continue their work, to pursue the mystery that had consumed them for months. But they were also being asked to keep silent about the most significant discovery in human history. Are you going to accept the assignment? Sorensen asked. Hale looked out the window at the Arctic night. Somewhere out there, beyond the range of radar and human vision, the lights were watching, waiting, preparing for something that neither he nor anyone else fully understood. Yes, he said simply. Because someone needs to be ready when they come back. Someone needs to understand them, or at least try to, and because, he paused, searching for words. Because I think they chose us for a reason. Not just randomly. They appeared to military personnel, to scientists, to people who would document and analyze rather than panic. They're teaching us, slowly, carefully, and I want to see where that education leads. Sorensen nodded. Then I'm in too. But Captain, when the time comes when they do reveal themselves publicly, we need to make sure humanity is ready. We need to build bridges, establish protocols, create understanding. Because if we get this wrong, if we respond with fear instead of curiosity, I know, Hale said quietly, everything could change, for better or worse. They sat together as the sun began to rise, or rather, as the deep blue of Arctic night lightened slightly toward the gray. The aurora faded with the approaching dawn. The lights were gone, but Hale knew they would return. They always did. Somewhere in the vast frozen expanse of the Arctic, in places humans rarely ventured, the phenomena continued. Objects in the sky, lights over ice, technology beyond comprehension. And now, finally, there were people watching back. People trying to understand. People preparing for the day when Earth would have to acknowledge that it was not alone in the universe. Captain Morgan Hale had come to the Arctic looking for a challenge. He'd found something far more profound, a mystery that would define the rest of his life, a question that might not have an answer, and a responsibility he'd never asked for but now couldn't ignore. The lights would return. They always did. And when they came back, he would be ready. Recommendation: accelerate preparation protocols, expand Project Aurora scope to include global monitoring network. Develop public communication strategy for eventual disclosure. The lights are watching. They are learning about us as we are learning about them. The question is not whether contact will become public knowledge, but when, and whether humanity will be ready when that moment arrives. Some moments change everything. A split second where reality bends, where the impossible becomes undeniable, where every certainty you've built your life upon suddenly crumbles. For pilot Tyler Knox and technician Aria Lewis, that moment lasted exactly 48 seconds. 48 seconds when the sky itself seemed to hold its breath. 48 seconds that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. In the vast emptiness of the Arctic night, where stars burn cold and the aurora paints the darkness in shades of impossible green, Flight 92 encountered something that shouldn't exist. And the only proof they have is a gap in the recordings, a black hole in the data where 48 seconds of reality simply disappeared. This is what happens when the sky stops making sense. Tyler Knox had flown the Anchorage to Fairbanks route 217 times. He knew every mile of that corridor, every landmark visible in the perpetual winter darkness, every radio frequency and navigation waypoint. It was a milk run, a simple 2-hour hop carrying freight between Alaska's 2 largest cities. Nothing exciting, nothing dangerous, just hours of monotonous flying through the Arctic night, which was exactly how he liked it. At 34, Knox had logged over 8,000 flight hours, most of them in the left seat of various cargo aircraft. He'd spent 6 years flying for the Air Force, including deployments to some of the world's most challenging environments, before transitioning to civilian freight operations. He'd landed on short runways in Afghanistan, flown through sandstorms in Iraq, and navigated typhoons in the Pacific. After all that, hauling boxes between Anchorage and Fairbanks felt like a vacation. The Boeing 737-800F sat on the tarmac, its white fuselage barely visible against the snow-covered ramp. It was a freighter variant. No passenger seats, no windows along the sides, just a reinforced cargo deck designed to haul whatever needed hauling. Tonight's load was standard for this route: mail, spare parts for mining equipment, and several pallets of supplies for the University of Alaska's research facilities. Knox completed his pre-flight walk-around, his flashlight beam playing across the aircraft's surfaces. Ice management was critical in Alaska winters. Even a thin layer of frost on the wings could be catastrophic. But the ground crew had done their job well. The de-icing fluid still glistened on the wings, and the control surfaces moved freely. "Evening, Captain Knox." He turned to see Aria Lewis approaching across the ramp, a equipment bag slung over her shoulder. Lewis was one of Polar Air Freight's maintenance technicians, specializing in avionics and electrical systems. She was 29, relatively new to Alaska, but her reputation for thoroughness had spread quickly among the pilot group. "Ms. Lewis." Knox nodded in greeting. "Didn't expect to see you tonight. Isn't it a bit late for maintenance?" "Riding along, actually." She gestured to the aircraft. "We've had intermittent electrical gremlins on this bird for the past week. Nothing that would ground it, but enough to be annoying. Thought I'd come along, see if anything acts up in flight. Plus, I need to verify the FDR installation. We replaced the flight data recorder yesterday." Knox appreciated that kind of dedication. Too many technicians just signed off paperwork without really understanding the systems they maintained. "Fair enough. You've got jump seat privileges?" "All arranged with dispatch." Lewis patted her bag. "I'll stay out of your way. Just pretend I'm not here." "If you say so." We're wheels up in 30 minutes. As Lewis headed for the cargo door, Knox made his way to the cockpit. The 737's flight deck was a familiar environment. 2 seats, 4 main display screens, overhead panels covered with switches and circuit breakers. Modern enough to be reliable, old enough to still have mechanical backup instruments. Knox trusted this airplane. His co-pilot for the evening was already in the right seat, running through the preliminary checklist. First Officer Danny Kim was 26, building hours toward an eventual captain upgrade. Good kid, eager, professional, still young enough to be excited about flying instead of treating it as just a job. Pre-flight's complete, Kim reported, as Knox settled into the left seat. We've got a light load tonight, only 12,000 pounds. Weather's clear all the way to Fairbanks. Winds out of the north at 15 knots. Temperature's minus 35. Aurora's supposed to be spectacular tonight. Knox pulled on his headset and began his own scan of the instruments. Everything looked normal. Fuel was topped off. Hydraulics showed good pressure. Electrical systems were nominal. He glanced back through the open cockpit door and saw Lewis securing herself in the observer's jump seat, already pulling out some kind of diagnostic tablet. Anchorage ground, Polar 9-2, ready to push. Polar 9-2, anchorage ground, cleared to push and start. Taxi via Alpha when ready. The familiar routine unfolded. Engine start, taxi clearance, run-up checks. Knox had performed these procedures thousands of times, his hands moving across the controls with practiced efficiency. The 737's twin engines spooled up smoothly, their familiar whine filling the flight deck. Polar 9-2, anchorage tower, runway 7 right, cleared for takeoff. Climb and maintain 8,000, expect flight level 280 in 10 minutes. Cleared for takeoff, 7 right, Polar 9-2. Knox advanced the throttles, and the freighter began its takeoff roll. The runway lights blurred past as airspeed built, 60 knots, 80, 100. At 140 knots, he eased back on the control column, and the 737 lifted off into the Arctic night. Anchorage fell away beneath them, a scatter of lights against the overwhelming darkness. Within minutes, they'd left all trace of civilization behind. Below, there was nothing but wilderness. Mountains, forests, frozen rivers, all hidden beneath the winter night. Polar 9-2, contact Anchorage Center on 124.6. 24.6 Polar 9-2. Good night? Knox switched frequencies. Anchorage Center, Polar 9-2 with you out of 4,000 for 8,000. Polar 9-2, Anchorage Center, radar contact. Climb and maintain flight level 280. No reported traffic your route. They climbed through the darkness, the altimeter winding steadily upward. At 8,000 feet, Knox leveled off briefly while Center cleared them higher. Then they continued the climb, passing through 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 feet. The temperature dropped with altitude, minus 40 Celsius outside, cold enough that the moisture in their breath would freeze instantly if exposed. At 28,000 feet, they leveled off and Knox engaged the autopilot. The 737 settled into its cruise, flying north-northeast toward Fairbanks. Below, the landscape was invisible, marked only occasionally by the lights of a remote settlement or mine. Above, the stars were magnificent, thousands of them, sharp and clear in the Arctic air, and stretched across the northern horizon, the aurora borealis danced. Knox had seen the northern lights hundreds of times, but they never failed to impress him. Tonight's display was particularly intense, vast curtains of green and violet light rippling across the sky, pulsing and shifting as charged particles from the solar wind collided with Earth's atmosphere. It was like watching a cosmic ballet, beautiful and otherworldly. "Jesus, look at that," Kim breathed, staring at the aurora. I've been flying in Alaska for 3 years, and I still can't get over it." "It is rather impressive," Knox agreed. "Supposedly, there's been heightened solar activity this week. Makes for a good show." From the jump seat behind them, Lewis spoke up. "Actually, strong auroral activity can cause interesting effects on avionics. The charged particles create electromagnetic interference. Sometimes it messes with compass readings or radio reception." "Have you noticed anything unusual tonight?" Knox asked. "Not so far. Everything's reading normal." He heard the click of her diagnostic equipment. "Though I am seeing some minor fluctuations in the electrical bus voltage. Nothing significant, probably just normal variation. But that's the kind of thing that's been intermittent on this aircraft." Knox made a mental note of that, but wasn't concerned. Modern aircraft had redundant electrical systems precisely to handle minor anomalies. As long as everything stayed within normal parameters, there was no issue. The flight continued uneventfully. They passed their first navigation waypoint, then the second. The radio occasionally crackled with transmissions from other aircraft. Another freighter 40 miles to their west, a medevac helicopter operating near Denali National Park, the usual sparse traffic that characterized Alaska flying at night. Knox found his mind wandering, as it often did on these routine flights. He thought about his daughter, who'd be starting college next fall. Thought about whether he should finally finish that deck project he'd been putting off for 2 years. Thought about whether polar air freight would make him a check airman, which would mean more money, but also more responsibility. The mundane thoughts of a pilot on a routine flight. At 23:14 hours, they were approximately halfway to Fairbanks, overflying the remote wilderness northwest of Denali National Park. There were no settlements below, no roads, nothing but frozen forest and mountain peaks. The nearest human being was probably 50 miles away. That's when Kim noticed it first. "Hey Tyler, you seeing this?" Knox glanced at the primary flight display. The artificial horizon showed them straight and level at 28,000 feet. Airspeed was 340 knots. Everything appeared normal. "Seeing what?" "The nav display. Look at the heading indicator." Knox shifted his attention to the navigation instruments. The heading indicator, which showed their magnetic course, was displaying 045 degrees, northeast, exactly as it should be. But as he watched, the numbers began to fluctuate. 045, 047, 043, 046. The heading was oscillating by a few degrees, back and forth. "Compass malfunction?" Kim suggested. Knox checked the backup magnetic compass mounted above the windscreen. It showed steady on 045 degrees, no oscillation. "Backup compass is solid, might be interference from the aurora. Lewis, you catching this?" "I am." Her voice was tense. "I'm showing electrical fluctuations across multiple systems. Bus voltage is varying by about 2 volts. That shouldn't be happening." "Is it a problem?" Knox kept his voice calm, but his attention was now fully focused on the instruments. "Shouldn't be. The voltage regulators should compensate automatically." But she stopped mid-sentence, because at that moment, every screen in the cockpit went dark. Not flickered, not dimmed. They simply went black, as if someone had flipped a master switch. The 6 main flight displays, primary flight display, navigation display, engine instruments, all of them just died. The cockpit lighting cut out. The radio went silent. Even the small LED indicators on the overhead panel extinguished. The only light came from outside. The stars, the aurora, and something else. Something in front of them. Knox's training took over instantly. His eyes went to the standby instruments, the mechanical attitude indicator and altimeter that operated independently of the main electrical system. They were still working, showing straight and level flight. The engines were still running. He could hear them, feel their vibration through the airframe. "Lost all electrical," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline spike. "Danny, get on the backup radio." But Kim wasn't responding. Knox turned to look at his co-pilot and saw Kim frozen, staring forward through the windscreen, his face illuminated by a pulsing light. Knox followed his gaze. Through the cockpit windows, perhaps a mile ahead and slightly above them, something was there. It was a light, but not like any light Knox had ever seen. Not a navigation beacon, not another aircraft's landing lights, not a reflection off ice crystals. This light was pulsing in a regular rhythm, cycling through colors that shouldn't exist. Blue-white, then a shade of green that was somehow brighter than the aurora, then something between purple and silver that hurt to look at directly. And it was moving. Not flying exactly. It was maintaining position relative to their aircraft, matching their speed perfectly, staying about a mile ahead. But it moved with impossible fluidity, making micro-adjustments that no aircraft could perform. Knox tried to reach for the radio selector, tried to call center, tried to do anything. But his hand wouldn't move. His entire body felt frozen, locked in place. He could breathe, could blink, could move his eyes, but his muscles simply would not respond to his commands. In the back of his mind, the rational part of his brain was screaming. This was impossible. Aircraft don't just freeze, electrical systems don't all fail simultaneously. Lights don't pulse in colors that shouldn't exist. This couldn't be happening, but it was. He was aware of Lewis behind him, heard her trying to speak, heard the words come out slowly, distorted, like a recording played at the wrong speed. Time itself seemed wrong, stretched, elastic. The light pulsed again, brighter this time. And in that moment, Knox felt something he'd never experienced in 8,000 hours of flying. He felt observed. Not watched, observed, studied, analyzed, as if something impossibly intelligent was examining them, taking their measure, recording their presence. The sensation was so strong, so alien, that it triggered a primal fear response buried deep in his brain. The light pulsed a third time, and suddenly everything snapped back to normal. The displays came back online, all 6 screens flickering to life simultaneously. The cockpit lights returned. The radio crackled with a transmission from center, mid-sentence, as if there'd been no interruption. The engines continued their steady operation. Knox's hands were back under his control. He grabbed the control column, verified their attitude, still straight and level, checked the navigation display. They were on course, on altitude exactly where they should be. He looked forward through the windscreen. The light was gone, just empty sky and the aurora. "What the—" Kim's voice was shaky. "Tyler, what just happened? Did we lose electrical? I couldn't move. I know." Knox's hands were trembling slightly. He forced them steady. "Lewis, status report." For a moment, there was no response. Then, "Systems appear normal, all displays operational. But that's impossible. We lost everything. Total electrical failure. That shouldn't just resolve itself." Knox keyed the radio. "Anchorage Center, Polar 9-2, how do you read?" "Polar 9-2 Center. I read you 5x5. Did you call earlier?" "We had some brief interference on your frequency." "Center, Polar 9-2, we experienced a momentary electrical anomaly. All systems appear normal now. Did you lose our radar contact?" A pause. "Negative, 9-2. We've had continuous radar contact. Your transponder's been solid the whole time. Are you declaring an emergency?" Knox exchanged glances with Kim. The controller was saying they'd had continuous contact. But Knox knew, absolutely knew, that they'd lost all electrical power. Their transponder couldn't have been operating. Negative, Center. Systems are nominal now. Continuing to Fairbanks. Roger, Polar 9-2. Let us know if you need anything. Knox sat back in his seat, his mind racing. What had just happened? How long had it lasted? It felt like minutes, but the controller was saying there'd been no gap in radar coverage. And that light... Did you both see it? He asked quietly. The light in front of us. I saw it, Kim confirmed. Christ, I saw it. What was that thing? I saw it too, Lewis said from the jump seat. And I got readings. Before everything went dark, my diagnostic equipment was showing electromagnetic interference levels off the scale. And Captain Knox, there's something else you need to know. What? Look at the clock. Knox focused on the digital chronometer on the instrument panel. It showed 23:17:48. He'd looked at that same clock just before the anomaly. It had read 23:17 and 48 seconds. The entire event had lasted 48 seconds, but it had felt like forever. The landing at Fairbanks was routine. Knox flew the approach manually, not trusting the autopilot after what they'd experienced. The 737 touched down smoothly on runway 01L, and they taxied to the cargo ramp without incident. But nothing felt normal. As soon as they shut down the engines, Lewis was out of her seat, pulling equipment from her bag. I need to download the flight data recorder before anyone else touches this aircraft, she said urgently. Whatever happened up there, it should be captured on the FDR and cockpit voice recorder. Knox nodded. Do it. Danny, start the shutdown checklist, but don't touch any electrical systems until Lewis finishes. While Lewis worked, Knox sat in the left seat, staring at the instruments. Everything appeared normal. The electrical systems showed no faults. The engine parameters were exactly where they should be. There was no indication that anything unusual had occurred, except for 48 seconds of time that felt like an eternity. His hands were still shaking slightly. He'd been flying for 12 years, had handled engine failures, severe turbulence, equipment malfunctions, all the standard emergencies that pilots train for. He'd never felt fear like this, because all those other situations, no matter how serious, made sense. They had explanations. They had procedures. This didn't make sense, and that terrified him more than any engine failure ever had. Got it, Lewis announced, disconnecting a cable from a panel behind the co-pilot's seat. She held up a portable hard drive. FDR data is downloaded. I'll start analysis as soon as we get back to Anchorage. What about the cockpit voice recorder? Kim asked. That's a separate system, but I can access it once we're at the maintenance facility. Lewis paused, her expression troubled. Captain Knox, I need to ask you something. During the event, could you move? No, I was completely frozen. Could see, could hear, could think, but couldn't move a muscle. Same here, Kim confirmed. Lewis nodded slowly. I experienced the same thing, which means it wasn't a medical issue. Something external affected all three of us simultaneously. Knox appreciated her analytical approach, but it didn't make him feel any better. What about your diagnostic equipment? Did it record anything? Some of it, but there's a gap, exactly 48 seconds where the recordings show static, like the data was corrupted or... She trailed off. Or what? Or deliberately erased, but that's impossible. The equipment is solid state, no moving parts. It doesn't just lose data. A knock on the cockpit door interrupted them. A ground crew member stuck his head in. Hey guys, you ready to unload? We've got a tight schedule tonight. Knox forced himself to sound normal. Yeah, we're secured, all yours. As the ground crew began working, Knox, Kim, and Lewis gathered their belongings and deplaned. The Fairbanks ramp was quiet at this hour, just a few other aircraft visible in the darkness. The temperature was brutal, minus 42 Celsius according to the terminal display. Knox's breath froze instantly, forming ice crystals that caught the light. They made their way to the crew room, where a pot of questionable coffee waited. Knox poured 3 cups, not caring about the quality. He needed something hot, something normal. "We have to report this," Kim said, cupping his hands around his coffee. "Right? I mean, something happened up there, something serious." "Report what exactly?" Knox asked. "That we saw a weird light? That our electrical system briefly went offline? That we lost 48 seconds that we can't account for?" "Yes, all of that." Knox wanted to agree, but he'd been in aviation long enough to know what would happen. There'd be an investigation. They'd be grounded pending evaluation. There'd be drug tests, psychological evaluations, questions about their mental fitness to fly. And at the end of it all, the official report would probably say something like, "Temporary electrical malfunction due to electromagnetic interference from enhanced auroral activity." The light, that impossible, color-shifting light, would be dismissed as an optical illusion. The time discrepancy would be attributed to stress or disorientation, and his career would be forever marked by this incident. "We need to see what the recorders show first," Lewis said. "Hard data. If the FDR and CVR captured the anomaly, we'll have proof. Something objective that can't be dismissed." "And if they didn't?" Kim asked. Lewis met his eyes. "Then we're in a very strange situation." They sat in silence for a moment, drinking bad coffee in a shabby crew room in Fairbanks, Alaska, while outside the aurora continued its dance across the Arctic sky. And somewhere out there, in the vast darkness between the stars, something had watched them pass by, something that could stop time itself. Knox thought about the sensation he'd felt, that overwhelming awareness of being observed, studied, catalogued. He thought about the light, pulsing in colors that shouldn't exist. And he thought about 48 seconds that might hold the key to understanding something humanity wasn't ready to understand. "Let's get back to Anchorage," he finally said. "We need to analyze those recordings, and then we'll decide what to do." They finished their coffee and headed back out into the brutal cold, where their return flight waited. Another routine trip between Fairbanks and Anchorage. Another 2 hours in the Arctic night. But Knox knew, with absolute certainty, that nothing would ever be routine again. The maintenance hangar was nearly empty at this hour. A single overhead light illuminated the workbench where Aria Lewis had set up her equipment, creating a pool of brightness in the otherwise dim space. The Boeing 737 from Flight 92 sat nearby, dark and silent, its cargo doors open as the ground crew finished unloading. Lewis had been working for 2 hours straight, running analysis on the flight data recorder information she'd downloaded. Her laptop screen glowed with graphs, timelines, and data tables. Tyler Knox and Danny Kim sat nearby, drinking more coffee and waiting for her verdict. The return flight from Fairbanks had been uneventful. Too uneventful almost, as if the universe was trying to pretend that nothing unusual had happened earlier. Knox had flown manually again, not trusting the autopilot, but every system had performed flawlessly. No electrical anomalies, no strange lights, just a normal flight, which somehow made the earlier incident feel even more surreal. "All right," Lewis finally said, not taking her eyes off the screen. "I've been through the FDR data 3 times now, and I need you both to see this." Knox and Kim moved closer, looking over her shoulder at the laptop display. The screen showed a timeline with multiple colored lines representing different aircraft systems: altitude, airspeed, engine parameters, electrical voltage, dozens of data streams, all recorded by the flight data recorder at regular intervals. Here's the flight profile, Lewis explained, tracing a finger along the lines. Take off from Anchorage at 2258, climb to cruise altitude, level off at 28,000 feet at 2312. Everything's completely normal. Engine parameters are stable. Electrical systems are nominal. Navigation is tracking perfectly. Okay, Knox said. And then this. Lewis clicked a key, and a vertical red line appeared on the timeline. This is 2317 in hours, the moment the anomaly began. The data lines at the red marker looked normal for about half a second. Then they all did something impossible. They flatlined. Not gradually, not with any transition. They simply went from displaying normal variations to displaying nothing at all, flat, horizontal lines stretching across the graph. The FDR stopped recording? Kim asked. No. Look at the timestamp. Lewis pointed to the bottom of the screen. The time counter continued advancing. 23:17:01, 23:17:02, 23:17:03. The FDR was still running, still marking time, but it wasn't recording any data from the aircraft systems, like someone flipped a switch and cut off all the inputs. Knox studied the graph. How long does this continue? 48 seconds. Lewis advanced the timeline. At 23:17:48, the data lines suddenly snapped back to normal, resuming their typical variations as if nothing had happened. And here's where it gets really strange. When the recording resumes, all the aircraft parameters are exactly what they should be. Altitude, airspeed, heading, position. Everything is consistent with uninterrupted flight. It's as if those 48 seconds didn't happen. But they did happen, Knox said quietly. We experienced them. Exactly. But according to the FDR, the aircraft just jumped forward 48 seconds in time. No transition, no discontinuity in flight parameters, which is impossible. Kim leaned closer to the screen. Could it be a recorder malfunction? Maybe the FDR failed for 48 seconds. Lewis shook her head. I considered that, but the FDR has internal diagnostic systems that would flag any malfunction. There are no error codes, no diagnostic alerts. The recorder was functioning normally. It just had nothing to record for 48 seconds. What about the cockpit voice recorder? Knox asked. Did you pull that data? I did. Lewis switched to a different file on her laptop. An audio waveform appeared, the typical oscillating pattern of recorded sound. The CVR captures all cockpit audio, crew conversations, radio transmissions, warning sounds, everything. Let me play you the relevant section. She adjusted the volume and clicked play. Knox heard his own voice. Impressive. Supposedly, there's been heightened solar activity this week. Makes for a good show. Then Lewis's voice. Actually, strong auroral activity can cause interesting effects on avionics. The conversation continued, the mundane discussion they'd had about the aurora. Knox heard himself asking if Lewis had noticed anything unusual, heard her mention the voltage fluctuations she'd been monitoring. Then Kim's voice, tense. Hey, Tyler, you seeing this? Knox's response, seeing what? The nav display. Look at the heading indicator. And then the audio did something that made Knox's skin crawl. It didn't go silent, it didn't cut out. Instead, it became distorted, stretched, warped, like a recording played at the wrong speed. He heard his own voice saying, compass malfunction, but the words were drawn out, deeper, lasting several seconds instead of a fraction of a second. Then Lewis's voice, equally distorted. I'm showing electrical fluctuations across multiple systems. The distortion intensified. The words became unintelligible, dissolving into a low, oscillating hum. Underneath that hum, Knox could hear other sounds, clicks, pops, bursts of static, and beneath even that something else, a pattern, a rhythm. The hum continued for exactly 48 seconds. Then, just as abruptly as it had started, the audio snapped back to normal. Knox heard himself saying, "Get on the backup radio," in mid-sentence, as if there'd been no interruption. The timeline continued normally from there. Lewis stopped the playback. The maintenance hangar seemed very quiet. "That's it," she said. "That's what the CVR captured. 48 seconds of whatever that is." "Play it again," Knox requested. "That hum, there's something in it." Lewis restarted the distorted section, increasing the volume. The oscillating hum filled the hangar, an unnerving sound that seemed to resonate at a frequency that made Knox's teeth ache. But underneath the hum, he could hear it clearly now, a pattern, not random noise, something structured, rhythmic, almost like... "It's like a signal," Kim said, evidently hearing the same thing. "Like there's information encoded in that sound." Lewis stopped the playback again. I ran it through some audio analysis software. The pattern repeats every 4 seconds. It's definitely not random, but I don't know enough about signal processing to determine if it's actually meaningful or just an artifact of the electromagnetic interference. Knox felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold Alaskan air seeping through the hangar walls. "So let me make sure I understand. The FDR shows all aircraft systems went dead for 48 seconds, then resumed with no transition. The CVR shows normal audio becoming severely distorted for the same 48 seconds, with what might be an encoded signal underneath. And all of this happened at the exact moment we saw that light." "That's correct," Lewis confirmed. "But air traffic control said they maintained radar contact the entire time. They saw no interruption." "Which means one of two things," Lewis said. "Either their radar data is wrong, or our aircraft's recording systems are wrong." "Or there's a third option," Kim said quietly. "What if both are correct? What if we actually did fly continuously from ATC's perspective, but from our perspective, from inside the aircraft, time did something different?" Lewis and Knox both looked at him. The young co-pilot shrugged uncomfortably. "I know how that sounds. But we all experienced it. We were frozen, time felt wrong, and when it was over, exactly 48 seconds had passed. What if that light did something to us? Something that affected our subjective experience of time without affecting the aircraft's actual flight path?" Knox wanted to dismiss the idea as absurd, but he couldn't, because deep down he knew Kim was right. Something had happened to them during those 48 seconds. Something that couldn't be explained by equipment malfunction or electromagnetic interference. "I need to access the aircraft's other systems," Lewis said. "The navigation computer stores its own logs. So does the electrical management system. If we can pull data from those independent sources and compare them to the FDR and CVR, we might be able to build a more complete picture." "Do it," Knox said. "I want every byte of data we can get off this aircraft." As Lewis began packing up her analysis equipment to move it onto the plane, Knox walked over to one of the hangar windows. Outside, dawn was beginning to break, the horizon showing the first hints of deep blue against the black sky. The aurora had faded, but he could still see it faintly, that ghostly curtain of light. Kim joined him at the window. "Tyler, what are we going to do? I mean, eventually we have to report this. The company will want to know why we deviated from the flight plan." "Why?" "We didn't deviate from the flight plan," Knox interrupted. "According to ATC, we flew a perfect route. From their perspective, nothing unusual happened. But we know something happened, and we have the recordings to prove it." Knox turned to face his co-pilot. "And what do you think will happen when we show them those recordings? When we tell them we saw a light that moved in impossible ways, that time stopped, that we couldn't move our own bodies. Kim didn't answer. They'll ground us, Knox continued. Mandatory psychological evaluation, drug testing, maybe permanent suspension pending a full investigation, and at the end of it all, they'll conclude we experienced some kind of shared delusion brought on by stress or oxygen deprivation or God knows what. So you're saying we should cover it up? I'm saying we need more information before we decide anything. Lewis is right. We need all the data. We need to understand what actually happened before we go public with a story that'll end our careers. From the aircraft came Lewis's voice. Guys, you need to see this. Knox and Kim hurried back to the 737. Lewis was standing near the open avionics bay, her diagnostic tablet in hand. Her expression was troubled. I pulled the electrical system logs, she explained. They show the same 48-second gap as the FDR, but there's something else. Look at the voltage readings immediately before the gap. She held out the tablet. The display showed a graph of electrical bus voltage over time. The line was mostly flat, showing the steady 28 volts typical of aircraft electrical systems. But in the seconds leading up to the 48-second gap, the voltage began spiking. Wild oscillations that went from 24 volts up to 32 volts and back again. Those fluctuations are extreme, Lewis said. They should have triggered multiple warning systems, but we didn't get any warnings, did we? Knox thought back. No, nothing. The instruments were showing normal until they all went dark. Because the instruments were lying, Lewis said. Or rather, they were reporting what they were supposed to report, but the actual electrical state of the aircraft was going haywire. Look at the last reading before the gap. She pointed to the graph. The final voltage reading before the data stopped was 34.7 volts, far above normal operating range, and the line was still climbing steeply when it abruptly ended. What would cause that? Kim asked. I don't know. External electromagnetic interference could affect the readings, but voltage that high should have blown circuit breakers, possibly damaged equipment. Yet, when the data resumes, everything's back to normal. 28 volts, steady as a rock. As if it was reset, Knox said. As if something reset it, Lewis agreed. They stood in silence for a moment, the implications sinking in. Knox's rational mind was fighting against what the evidence suggested. Because the evidence suggested something impossible, that their aircraft had been acted upon by an external force, that this force had affected their electrical systems and their perception of time, and that when it was finished, everything had been restored to normal. I'm going to pull the navigation computer logs next, Lewis said. See if they show anything different. But Captain Knox, I have to tell you, I've been doing this job for 6 years. I've seen electrical problems. I've seen instrumentation failures. I've seen computers glitch. I've never seen anything like this. Neither have I, Knox admitted. And I've been flying for 12 years. So, what do we do? Knox wished he had a good answer. The safe thing would be to file a routine maintenance report, note the electrical anomalies, and let the company's investigation run its course. But he knew that wouldn't be enough, because this wasn't a routine maintenance issue. This was something else entirely. Keep analyzing the data, he finally said. Document everything, and don't talk to anyone else about this until we decide how to proceed. Lewis nodded. Understood. I should have the full analysis complete by this afternoon. I'll compile everything into a comprehensive report. As she climbed back into the avionics bay, Knox checked his watch. It was nearly 04 hours. He'd been awake for over 20 hours, and exhaustion was beginning to set in. But he knew he wouldn't be able to sleep. Not with the memory of that light pulsing in impossible colors. Not with the sensation of being observed by something vast and unknowable. Not with 48 seconds of missing time that might hold the key to humanity's most profound question. Are we alone? Knox had gone home for a few hours, tried to sleep, failed. He'd lain in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of Flight 92 in his mind, trying to find any rational explanation that didn't involve impossible lights and time distortions. He'd found none. Now, he was back at the Operations Center, a nondescript office building near Anchorage's Ted Stevens Airport. The Ops Center was where Polar Air Freight managed its daily operations, dispatching aircraft, coordinating maintenance, filing flight plans. It was busy today, phones ringing constantly, dispatchers hunched over computers, the organized chaos of a freight operation. Knox had been summoned by the chief pilot, Captain Rachel Moss. The message had been brief. Need to discuss Flight 92, my office, 14:30. He knocked on her door at exactly 14:30. Come in. Captain Moss was 48, a former Navy pilot who'd transitioned to civilian aviation after 20 years of military service. She was professional, demanding, and not known for patience with pilots who deviated from standard procedures. Knox respected her, but had never particularly warmed to her management style. She gestured to a chair. Sit down, Tyler. We need to talk about last night. Knox sat, keeping his expression neutral. What about it? Your flight data. I've been reviewing the automatic upload from the aircraft's monitoring system. She turned her computer monitor so he could see it. The screen showed a summary of Flight 92's key parameters: route, altitude, fuel consumption, flight time. Everything appeared normal. Your flight time was 1 hour 53 minutes, Moss continued. Fuel consumption was within expected parameters. No system warnings, no anomalies flagged. A perfectly routine flight. Yes, ma'am. So why did Aria Lewis submit a maintenance request this morning asking for a comprehensive electrical system inspection on that aircraft? And why did she specifically request that the aircraft be grounded pending that inspection? Knox had wondered when this would come up. We experienced some minor electrical anomalies during the flight. Voltage fluctuations. Lewis wanted to investigate before the aircraft went out again. Voltage fluctuations. Moss's tone suggested skepticism. Serious enough to ground the aircraft? Lewis is being thorough. Tyler, I've known you for 3 years. You're one of my most reliable pilots. You don't ground aircraft unnecessarily, so I'm going to ask you directly. Did something happen last night that I need to know about? Knox met her gaze. This was the moment. He could tell her everything. The light, the frozen time, the impossible experience. He could show her the recordings, the data gaps, all of it. Or he could protect his career and his crew's careers by keeping silent until he had more information. We encountered strong auroral activity, he said carefully. It caused some electromagnetic interference with the instruments. Heading indicator oscillation, voltage fluctuations, brief radio static. Nothing that affected flight safety, but enough that Lewis wanted to do a thorough check. Moss studied him for a long moment. Knox had the uncomfortable feeling that she knew he wasn't telling her everything, but couldn't quite figure out what he was hiding. All right, she finally said. But I need that aircraft back in service by tomorrow. We're already short on available planes. If Lewis doesn't find anything significant, I'm putting it back on the schedule. Understood. And Tyler? If something did happen last night, something more than voltage fluctuations, I need you to tell me. I can't have pilots flying with unaddressed safety concerns. I understand, Captain. She dismissed him with a nod, and Knox left her office feeling like he'd just walked a tightrope. He'd bought them time, but not much. By tomorrow, he'd have to make a decision. His phone buzzed. A text from Lewis. Analysis complete. Need to meet. Not at facility. Somewhere private. Knox felt his pulse quicken. Lewis had found something. Something significant enough that she didn't want to discuss it at the maintenance facility. He texted back, "Where?" The response came immediately. "Tony's coffee house downtown. 30 minutes. Bring Danny." Knox looked at the message, then deleted it. Whatever Lewis had discovered, she was being careful, which meant the evidence was even more significant than he'd thought. He found Danny Kim in the pilot lounge, studying for his upcoming proficiency check. The young co-pilot looked as exhausted as Knox felt, dark circles under his eyes, a haunted expression that suggested he hadn't slept either. "Change of plans," Knox said quietly. "Lewis found something. We're meeting her downtown in 30 minutes. Kim closed his textbook. "What did she find?" "I don't know, but she doesn't want to talk at the facility. Come on." Tony's was a small independent coffee shop tucked into a side street near downtown Anchorage. It was the kind of place that catered to locals rather than tourists. Mismatched furniture, local art on the walls, and coffee that actually tasted good. More importantly, it was quiet on a weekday afternoon, with only a handful of customers scattered among the tables. Lewis was already there, sitting in a back corner with a laptop and a stack of papers. She'd clearly been working through the data systematically, her analytical mind trying to make sense of the impossible. Knox and Kim ordered coffee and joined her. Lewis waited until they were settled before speaking. "I've completed the analysis," she said, keeping her voice low. "And I need you to understand something before I show you what I found. What I'm about to share with you doesn't make sense. It violates multiple principles of physics, but the data is solid. I've checked and rechecked. This is what the aircraft systems recorded." Knox felt a knot forming in his stomach. "Just show us." Lewis opened her laptop and pulled up a document. "I pulled logs from 7 different aircraft systems: flight data recorder, cockpit voice recorder, electrical management system, navigation computer, engine monitoring system, communication system, and the aircraft's central maintenance computer. All of them record data independently. If there was a system-wide failure, you'd expect the failures to be different across different systems, right?" "Right," Knox agreed. "They have different power sources, different data storage systems." "Exactly. But look at this." Lewis brought up a timeline showing all 7 data streams. Each one showed the same thing. Normal operation, then a 48-second gap starting at exactly 23:17 o'clock, then normal operation resuming. "They all failed simultaneously," Kim observed. "Not failed," Lewis corrected. "That's what's so strange. There's no indication of failure. The systems just stopped recording external data for exactly 48 seconds. Like someone pressed a pause button on reality itself." She clicked to another file. "Now, I managed to extract some data from the navigation computer's RAM. This is temporary memory that doesn't get recorded to the permanent logs. And I found something interesting." The screen showed a string of numbers and letters, coordinates, timestamps, velocity data. During those 48 seconds, the navigation computer was still running internal calculations. It was tracking our position using inertial guidance, measuring acceleration and integrating it to determine position change. "And?" Knox prompted. "And according to those calculations, during the 48-second gap, the aircraft traveled 4.7 nautical miles. That's consistent with our airspeed of 340 knots. The aircraft kept flying." "But we weren't flying," Kim protested. "We were frozen. Everything stopped." "From our perspective," Lewis said. But from the aircraft's perspective, or at least from the inertial guidance system's perspective, we maintained steady flight, which means the freeze only affected our conscious perception, not the physical reality. Knox tried to wrap his mind around that. So, we flew 4.7 miles while experiencing, what? Some kind of temporal distortion? I don't know what to call it, but there's more. Lewis pulled up another file. I analyzed the audio from the CVR in detail. Remember that hum? I ran it through spectral analysis, looking at the frequency components. She played a modified version of the audio, the distorted hum they'd heard before, but now it was overlaid with a visualization, a graph showing frequency content over time. The hum is composed of multiple discrete frequencies, Lewis explained. They're not random. They follow mathematical relationships, harmonic intervals, prime number sequences. This isn't interference, this is structured information. Knox stared at the graph. You're saying it's a signal, a message. I'm saying it has all the characteristics of encoded information, but I don't have the expertise to decode it. That would require signal processing specialists, probably cryptographers. She paused. Which brings us to the big question. Do we report this? The three of them sat in silence, the weight of the decision pressing down on them. Around them, the coffee shop continued its normal afternoon routine. Customers coming and going, the espresso machine hissing, quiet conversations at other tables. Normal life. Unaware of the impossible choice being made in the back corner. If we report it, Kim finally said, what happens? Best case scenario, Knox replied. They take it seriously, launch a full investigation, bring in experts to analyze the data. We cooperate fully, and eventually they figure out what happened. And worst case? Worst case, they decide we're unreliable. Ground us. Maybe permanently. The data gets buried in some classified file, and no one ever knows the truth. Lewis leaned forward. There's another option. We could go public. Release the data to researchers, media, whoever will listen. Force the truth out into the open. And destroy our careers in the process, Knox said. Plus, without context, without proper analysis, the data could be misinterpreted, or dismissed as a hoax. So we do nothing, Kim asked. Just pretend it didn't happen. Knox shook his head. No, we can't do nothing. Whatever we encountered up there, it's real. It's active, and if it happened to us, it might happen to others. He thought about the sensation he'd felt, that overwhelming awareness of being observed, the intelligence behind that observation, the power to stop time, to manipulate their perception of reality. We need help, he said. Someone with expertise in aerospace anomalies, someone who won't immediately dismiss this as crazy, someone who has the resources to analyze this properly, but also has a reason to keep it confidential. Do you know anyone like that? Lewis asked. Knox thought for a moment. Then he remembered something he'd heard years ago when he was still in the Air Force. Rumors about a special projects division that investigated unexplained incidents, not officially acknowledged, but known among certain circles. Maybe, he said. There's a guy I knew in the Air Force. He transferred to some kind of special research group, dealt with unusual events, classified stuff. I haven't talked to him in years, but if he's still doing that work, he might be able to help. Is that safe? Kim asked. Going to a government agency? Safer than going to the media. And if this really is what I think it is, evidence of non-human intelligence, then the government probably already knows about similar incidents. They might even be looking for this kind of data. Lewis nodded slowly. All right, but I want to keep copies of everything. Encrypted, stored securely. So if something happens, if this gets buried, we have backup evidence. Agreed, Knox said. "Make 3 copies. We each keep one, in case something happens to any of us." It sounded paranoid, but after last night, Knox no longer trusted his assumptions about how the world worked. They spent the next hour going through the data in detail. Lewis walked them through every anomaly, every strange reading, every gap in the recordings. The more Knox saw, the more convinced he became that they'd encountered something extraordinary. But one question kept nagging at him. "Why us?" he asked. "We were just a random freight flight. There are dozens of flights over Alaska every night. Why did this happen to us specifically?" Lewis had clearly been thinking about the same question. Maybe we were just in the right place at the right time, or the wrong place at the wrong time, depending on how you look at it. Or maybe it wasn't random, Kim suggested. Maybe whatever that thing was, it chose us deliberately. Maybe it was looking for something. Looking for what? I don't know. But think about that sensation Captain Knox described. Being observed, studied. What if we were being tested, evaluated? What if that 48 seconds was some kind of scan or analysis? Knox didn't want to believe that. Because if Kim was right, it meant they'd been selected for a reason, marked somehow. And whatever had marked them might come back. "Let's focus on what we can prove," he said, pushing the speculation aside. "We have solid evidence of an anomaly. That's what matters. Everything else is conjecture." Lewis closed her laptop. "So, what's our next step?" "I'll try to contact my old Air Force friend. See if he can help us or point us in the right direction. In the meantime, we keep this between us. No discussions at work, no emails, nothing that could be intercepted or monitored." "You really think someone might be monitoring us?" Kim asked. Knox thought about the implications of what they'd experienced. If there was non-human intelligence operating in Earth's airspace, it seemed likely that various governments would be interested in documenting such encounters. And if those governments were running secret programs to investigate these phenomena, "I think we need to be careful," he said. "That's all." They gathered their materials and prepared to leave. As they stood, Lewis caught Knox's arm. "Captain, there's one more thing. Something I haven't mentioned yet." Knox felt a chill. "What?" "The electromagnetic readings. I've been comparing them to documented cases of similar phenomena. And there's a pattern. Events like this tend to cluster, geographically and temporally. If one occurs, there's a higher probability of others occurring nearby within a short time frame." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying this might not be over. Whatever we encountered last night, it might happen again. Soon. And maybe not just to us." Knox absorbed that information. The idea that other pilots, other flights might soon encounter the same phenomenon was both terrifying and somehow comforting. Terrifying because he wouldn't wish that experience on anyone. Comforting because more witnesses might mean more evidence, more validation that what they'd experienced was real. "Keep monitoring," he told Lewis. "If you see any reports of unusual electrical anomalies or communication problems from other flights in the region, let me know immediately." They left the coffee shop separately, Knox staying behind to finish his coffee while the others departed. He wanted a few minutes alone to think, to process everything they'd learned. Through the window, he could see the Alaska sky, clear blue, the sun low on the horizon even in mid-afternoon. By 17:00, it would be dark again. The long Arctic night would return, and with it, perhaps, whatever had visited them. Knox pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for. Major Marcus Holland, U.S. Air Force. They'd served together 8 years ago, before Holland had transferred to that mysterious Special Projects Unit. He started to compose a text, then stopped. How did you explain something like this in a text message? How did you say, I think I encountered non-human intelligence and I have the flight recorder data to prove it, without sounding insane? In the end, he kept it simple. Marcus, Tyler Knox. Need to talk about something sensitive, call when you can, secure line. He hit send and waited. The response came faster than expected. Tyler, been a long time, call you in 10 minutes. Knox finished his coffee, paid his tab, and walked back to his truck. The parking lot was empty, which was good. He wanted privacy for this conversation. He sat in the driver's seat, engine running for warmth, and waited. Exactly 10 minutes later, his phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Tyler, it's Marcus. You said secure line, so I'm calling from an encrypted phone. What's going on? Knox took a deep breath. Marcus, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound crazy, but I need you to hear me out. And I need you to tell me if your current work involves investigating unexplained aerial phenomena. There was a pause, then, define unexplained. Objects that move in ways conventional aircraft can't. Objects that affect time perception. Objects that might not be human in origin. Another pause, longer this time. When Holland spoke again, his tone had changed. No longer casual, but intensely focused. Tyler, where are you right now? Anchorage, in my vehicle, in a public parking lot. Good, don't go home yet. I need to make some calls. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? There's a cafe called North Star on 5th Avenue, OAT. Marcus, what? Don't talk about this to anyone else. Don't send any emails, don't make any calls about it. And Tyler? Holland's voice was deadly serious. If what you're telling me is real, if you have evidence of what I think you have evidence of, you need to be very careful. Do you understand? Knox felt his pulse accelerate. Why? What's going on? We'll talk tomorrow. 08 o'clock, North Star. Come alone. The line went dead. Knox sat in his truck, engine idling, staring at his phone. Holland's reaction had confirmed his suspicions. There were people who took this seriously, who investigated these phenomena. But Holland's warning had also added a new layer of concern. You need to be very careful. Careful of what? Or careful of whom? Knox started driving, but not toward home. Instead, he headed toward Kim's apartment. They needed to compare notes, needed to make sure their stories were consistent. Because tomorrow morning, he would be talking to someone who might have answers, or who might have questions that Knox wasn't prepared to answer. Above him, the Alaska sky was beginning to darken. Soon the stars would emerge, and with them, perhaps, the aurora, that beautiful, otherworldly display of light that suddenly seemed less innocent than it had before. Because now Knox knew that there were other lights in the Arctic sky, lights that watched, lights that waited, and lights that might not be finished with Flight 92 yet. Knox arrived at the North Star 2 minutes early. The cafe was a modest establishment in downtown Anchorage, the kind of place that served decent breakfast and strong coffee to locals before their workday. This early, it was moderately busy. Construction workers grabbing coffee to go, a few business people having breakfast meetings, the normal rhythms of an Alaska morning. Marcus Holland was already there, sitting in a back booth away from the windows. Knox almost didn't recognize him. 8 years had added gray to Holland's hair and lines around his eyes. He wore civilian clothes, jeans, a heavy jacket, but carried himself with the same military bearing Knox remembered. They shook hands, and Knox slid into the booth. A waitress appeared immediately with coffee, which Knox accepted gratefully. He'd barely slept, his mind churning with questions and fears. "You look like hell," Holland observed. "I feel like hell. Been a rough couple of days." "So I gather." Holland waited until the waitress left, then leaned forward, keeping his voice low. Before we go any further, I need to ask you some questions. And I need you to answer honestly, because what you tell me will determine how I proceed. All right. First, are you under the influence of any drugs or medications that might affect your judgment or perception? No. Have you experienced any recent head trauma, medical issues, or psychological stress? No. Marcus, what is this? Standard protocol. Just answer the questions. Holland pulled out a small notebook. Second, is anyone else involved in this? Anyone you've told about what you experienced? Knox hesitated. He'd promised Lewis and Kim he'd keep them protected, but lying to Holland seemed counterproductive. My co-pilot and a maintenance technician, they both experienced it. They both helped analyze the data. Names: First Officer Danny Kim and Aria Lewis, avionics technician. Holland wrote that down. Are they aware you're meeting me? Kim knows. Lewis doesn't. Good. The fewer people who know about this meeting, the better. Holland looked up from his notebook. Now, tell me everything. Start from the beginning. Don't leave anything out. So, Knox told him, the routine flight, the aurora, the electrical anomalies, the light that appeared in front of them pulsing in impossible colors, the sensation of being frozen, unable to move, time stretching and distorting, the 48 seconds that felt like forever. And then he told Holland about the evidence, the gaps in the recordings, the distorted audio with its structured patterns, the way every system had failed and resumed simultaneously, the way the aircraft's inertial navigation suggested they'd kept flying while subjectively experiencing a temporal freeze. Holland listened without interruption, his expression neutral. He took occasional notes, but mostly just absorbed the information. When Knox finished, Holland was quiet for a long moment. You have copies of the recordings? He finally asked. Knox pulled out a USB drive and slid it across the table. Everything. FDR data, CVR audio, electrical logs, navigation data, all of it. Holland pocketed the drive. I need to verify this, have it analyzed by specialists, but assuming it's authentic, and I have no reason to think it isn't. He trailed off, choosing his words carefully. Tyler, what I'm about to tell you is classified. You can't repeat it. Not to Kim, not to Lewis, not to anyone. Understood? Understood. You're not the first. There have been other incidents. Not many, but enough that certain agencies have taken notice. Incidents involving unexplained aerial phenomena, temporal anomalies, electromagnetic disturbances. They cluster in certain regions, the Arctic, Antarctic, remote ocean areas. Knox felt vindication mixed with apprehension. So this is real, it's not just us. It's real. But here's the problem. We don't understand it. We've documented similar events, but we have no explanation for what's causing them, what intelligence is behind them, or what purpose they serve. Intelligence, Knox repeated. So you believe these are intelligently controlled? The evidence suggests it. The phenomena display purposeful behavior. They respond to being observed. They demonstrate technology far beyond our current capabilities. Holland leaned back, his expression troubled. And that's what makes them dangerous. Dangerous how? Because we don't know their intentions. Are they observing us, testing us, preparing for something? We have no idea. And until we do, every encounter represents a potential security risk. Knox thought about that sensation of being studied, evaluated. What do you want from me? Your cooperation. I need you to keep this quiet while we investigate. Don't file any official reports with your company. Don't talk to the media. If anyone asks about Flight 92, it was a routine flight with minor electrical issues that have been resolved. And what do we get in return? Answers. Or, at least, the best answers we can provide. I'm part of a task force that investigates these phenomena. We have resources, specialists, equipment. If anyone can figure out what happened to you, we can. Knox wanted to trust him. Holland had been a good officer, a good friend, but something about this felt wrong. What about Kim and Lewis? They experienced this too. They deserve to know what's going on. They'll be briefed, but separately, and they'll be asked to maintain the same confidentiality you're being asked to maintain. Why separately? Because we need independent accounts. Memories can become contaminated when people discuss their experiences together. We want to make sure each of you remembers clearly what happened. It made sense, but Knox still felt uneasy. And if we refuse, if we decide to go public anyway? Holland's expression hardened slightly. I'd advise against that. Not as a threat, but as practical advice. Without proper analysis, without context, your evidence could be dismissed or misinterpreted. You'd destroy your careers for nothing. Or we'd force the truth into the open. The truth is already out there, Tyler. It's just being managed carefully. Because if people knew, really knew, that there's non-human intelligence operating in our airspace, intelligence we can't control or predict, the social and political consequences would be catastrophic. Knox absorbed that. Part of him wanted to argue, to insist that people had a right to know. But another part, the pragmatic part that had survived 12 years of flying, recognized the wisdom and caution. All right, he said, we'll cooperate. But I want regular updates. I want to know what you find. I'll do what I can. But you have to understand, much of this is classified at levels above my clearance. There may be things I can't tell you. They finished their coffee and prepared to leave. As they stood, Holland put a hand on Knox's shoulder. Tyler, one more thing. If this happens again, if you encounter another anomaly, don't try to investigate it yourself. Contact me immediately. Day or night doesn't matter. Use the number I'm going to give you. He handed Knox a card with a single phone number. No name or agency listed. What makes you think it'll happen again? Knox asked. Because they always do. These phenomena show patterns. Repeat visits to certain locations, certain individuals. Like I said, we don't understand why, but if you've been marked somehow, if you've attracted their attention... Holland didn't finish the sentence. Knox pocketed the card, feeling a chill despite the warm cafe. Marked? That's a comforting thought. I'm not trying to scare you, just preparing you. Whatever those things are, they seem to choose their encounters deliberately. And now you've been chosen. They left the cafe separately. Knox walked back to his truck, his mind spinning with new information and new questions. He'd hoped for answers, and in a sense he'd gotten them. But the answers only raised more questions. Non-human intelligence. Repeat encounters. A government task force dedicated to investigating phenomena that officially didn't exist. And somewhere out there, in the vast Arctic darkness, lights that watched and waited. Knox drove home, exhausted but unable to rest, because he knew that tonight he'd have to fly again. Another routine freight run, another journey through the Arctic night, and this time he'd be watching the sky, waiting to see if they came back. In the eternal darkness of the Greenland winter, where the ice sheet stretches for hundreds of miles in every direction, and the nearest settlement lies 100 kilometers away, truth becomes negotiable. What you see can be rewritten. What you find can be explained away. What you know can be classified, filed, and forgotten. Commander Ethan Ward learned this lesson in the span of 48 hours. He learned that some marks on the ice are more than they appear, that some equipment failures have no rational explanation, and that some truths are too inconvenient to acknowledge. This is the story of what happened at Greenland Station 7 in January 2020. This is the story of what they found on the ice. And this is the story of how quickly the impossible can become officially mundane. Sometimes the cover-up begins before you even finish writing the report. Commander Ethan Ward stood at the observation window of Station 7's command center, watching the endless expanse of ice disappear into darkness. Even at mid-afternoon, the sun never rose this time of year, just a faint lightening of the southern horizon that lasted a few hours before fading back to complete darkness. The aurora borealis provided the only real illumination, painting the ice sheet in shades of green and violet. Station 7 was one of Denmark's remote Arctic research facilities, positioned on the Greenland ice sheet at 2,400 meters elevation. It was small, only 12 permanent personnel, but strategically important. The station monitored ice dynamics, atmospheric conditions, and seismic activity. It was also, though this wasn't officially acknowledged, a listening post for submarine activity and atmospheric anomalies in the Arctic region. Ward had been commanding Station 7 for 18 months. At 42, he'd spent 20 years in the Danish military, including deployments to Afghanistan and Arctic operations. He was methodical, disciplined, and comfortable with the isolation. The ice sheet suited his temperament, predictable, constant, unforgiving to those who didn't respect it. "Commander, we're getting unusual readings from the seismic array." Ward turned from the window. Dr. Sophia Anderson, the station's meteorologist, stood at one of the monitoring consoles, her expression puzzled. "Define unusual," Ward said, walking over. The ice measurement sensors, all 6 of them, started showing interference about 20 minutes ago, not equipment malfunction. The sensors are functional, but the data streams are corrupted. "Look at this." She pulled up a display showing real-time data from the seismic sensors embedded in the ice around the station. These sensors measured ice thickness, movement, and stability, critical information for understanding glacial dynamics. The graphs should have shown relatively smooth lines representing consistent measurements. Instead, they showed chaos. The data lines spiked wildly, dropped to 0, spiked again. No pattern, no consistency, just noise. "Could be electromagnetic interference," Ward suggested. "Solar activity?" "I checked. Solar wind is elevated, but nothing extreme. This shouldn't affect the sensors. They're designed to operate in high electromagnetic environments." Anderson switched to a different view. "And here's what's really strange. The interference started on all 6 sensors simultaneously, exactly 14:03 hours, like someone flipped a switch." Ward studied the timeline. She was right. The transition from normal to corrupted data was instantaneous across all sensors, despite them being positioned in different locations around the station, some as far as 2 kilometers away. "Where's Frost?" Ward asked, referring to the station's geologist. "In the ice core lab. Want me to get him?" "Please." While Anderson made the call, Ward continued examining the data. In his 18 months commanding Arctic stations, he'd seen equipment failures, power surges, sensor malfunctions. But he'd never seen all sensors fail simultaneously with this kind of coordinated timing. Dr. Liam Frost arrived 5 minutes later, still wearing his lab coat over thermal gear. The British geologist was 36, with the lean build of someone who spent significant time in the field. He was brilliant. Oxford-trained, published extensively on glaciology, but also skeptical to a fault. He trusted data, not intuition. Sophia says we have sensor problems? Frost studied the displays, his expression shifting from curious to concerned. That's not right. These sensors have redundant systems. They don't all fail simultaneously. Unless it's not failure, Ward said. Unless they're detecting something we don't understand. Frost glanced at him. Like what? I don't know. That's why you're here. What could cause this kind of interference pattern? Frost spent several minutes analyzing the data, pulling up diagnostic logs, checking system status. Finally, he shook his head. From a technical standpoint, there's nothing wrong with the sensors. They're operational. They're just receiving, I don't know what to call it, noise, but noise that's remarkably uniform across all 6 units. Could something be generating electromagnetic interference? Anderson asked. Something on the ice? We detected on our EM sensors, Frost replied. Unless, he stopped mid-sentence, pulling up another display. Wait, look at this. The screen showed electromagnetic field measurements from the station's atmospheric monitoring equipment. For most of the day, the readings had been normal, typical background levels with slight variations from the aurora. But starting at 1403, there was a spike. Not huge, but significant. And it had continued for exactly 17 minutes before dropping back to normal. 17 minutes, Ward noted. And the seismic sensors? Frost checked. Still showing interference, so we have an EM event that lasted 17 minutes, but the sensor interference is ongoing. That doesn't make sense. Ward felt a familiar tension building, the sense that something wasn't right, that there was a pattern here he wasn't seeing. I want to check the sensors physically. Could be ice buildup, damage we're not detecting remotely. In this weather, Anderson gestured toward the window, where wind-driven snow was creating whiteout conditions. It's -45 out there. Wind chill is -60. Then we wait until conditions improve. But first thing tomorrow, we're doing a field inspection of the nearest sensors. Frost nodded agreement. I'll prep the equipment. If there's something affecting the sensors, we need to document it properly. As Frost and Anderson returned to their work, Ward remained at the console, staring at the corrupted data streams. Something had happened at 1403 hours. Something that affected equipment across a wide area simultaneously. He pulled up the station's external cameras, reviewing footage from that time frame. The cameras showed nothing unusual, just the endless ice, the darkness, the aurora dancing overhead. But the cameras only covered the immediate area around the station. Whatever had caused the interference could have been kilometers away. Ward made a note in the station log. Seismic sensor anomaly beginning 1403 hours. Electromagnetic interference detected. Field inspection scheduled pending weather improvement. It was a routine entry. Professional, unremarkable. He had no way of knowing that within 24 hours, that entry would be amended, classified, and buried under a cover story that would turn the impossible into the mundane. The weather had cleared overnight. The wind had dropped to manageable levels, and the temperature had risen to -42. Still brutally cold, but survivable with proper gear. Ward assembled a small team for the field inspection. Himself, Frost, and technician Maria Torres, who maintained the station's remote sensing equipment. They geared up in the equipment room, multiple layers of thermal clothing, face masks, goggles, emergency beacons, radio communications gear. In Arctic conditions like these, equipment failure meant death within minutes. You didn't take chances. We'll check sensors 3 and 4 first, Ward briefed the team. They're closest about 800 meters north-northeast. If we find nothing unusual, we'll decide whether to check the others. Radio check every 15 minutes, Torres added. If anyone gets disoriented, hits trouble, we abort immediately. They stepped out of the station's airlock into the Arctic darkness. Ward's breath froze instantly, ice crystals forming on his face mask. The aurora provided enough light to see by. The ice sheet glowed faintly green, shadows stretching across the frozen landscape. They moved in single file, Ward leading, following the GPS coordinates to Sensor 3. The ice was smooth here, wind-polished to a glass-like surface. Their boots found purchase on the rough patches, but walking required constant attention. 15 minutes of careful progress brought them to the first sensor location. The sensor itself was visible, a small weather-resistant housing sitting on the ice connected to probes drilled several meters down into the ice sheet. Torres pulled out a diagnostic tablet and connected it to the sensor's data port. "Sensors functional," she reported, her voice muffled by the face mask. "Still showing that interference pattern, but the hardware is solid. No ice damage, no obvious problems." Ward scanned the area with his flashlight. The ice around the sensor looked normal, smooth, unbroken, unremarkable. "All right, let's check Sensor 4. It's about 300 meters northeast." They continued across the ice. The aurora intensified, ribbons of light flowing overhead like a celestial river. Ward had seen countless auroral displays, but they never failed to impress him. There was something hypnotic about them, something ancient and unknowable. They were about halfway to Sensor 4 when Frost stopped suddenly. "Commander, look at this." Ward and Torres joined him. Frost was shining his flashlight on the ice surface, and what Ward saw made him freeze for reasons that had nothing to do with the temperature. There was a mark on the ice. Not a crack, not a natural formation. A mark, it was roughly triangular, each side approximately 2 meters long. The edges were sharp, precise, as if someone had carved them with a laser. But most striking was the appearance of the ice within the triangle. It was darkened, almost black, with a texture that looked wrong, melted and refrozen, but not naturally. It looked burned. "What the hell is that?" Torres breathed. Frost was already kneeling beside it, examining it with a hand lens. "The ice has been subjected to intense heat. Look at the melting patterns. But the edges are so clean, so precise. This wasn't done with any tool I recognize." Ward took photographs with his phone camera, the flash illuminating the strange mark in stark detail. Could it be from lightning? Lightning leaves branching patterns, not geometric shapes. And besides, we'd have detected a lightning strike on our atmospheric sensors. Frost ran his gloved hand along one edge of the triangle. This was made by something generating controlled, intense heat, but there's no residue, no burn marks outside the precise boundary. It's like someone traced this pattern with a cutting torch, except no cutting torch could make marks this clean. Ward felt that tension again, stronger now. This wasn't natural. This wasn't equipment malfunction or atmospheric phenomena. This was evidence of something deliberate, something controlled. "Take samples," he ordered Torres. "Ice cores from inside the mark, from the edges, from outside. I want complete documentation." While Torres worked, Ward and Frost surveyed the surrounding area. About 15 meters from the triangular mark, they found Sensor 4, still functional, still showing the same interference pattern as the others. "The mark is almost exactly between Sensors 3 and 4, Frost observed, checking his GPS unit. "Right in the middle of our sensor array. You think that's coincidental?" "I don't believe in coincidences on this scale." Torres finished collecting samples and began taking measurements. The ice inside the triangle is approximately 4 centimeters thinner than the surrounding area. Whatever caused this melted through significant thickness. Ward did the mental calculation. 4 centimeters of ice, melted in a precise pattern, with no apparent heat source. The energy required would be substantial. Frost, what's your professional assessment? What could have caused this? The geologist was quiet for a moment, clearly wrestling with the evidence versus his scientific training. Honestly, I have no idea. The precision suggests artificial origin, but the energy levels required, the lack of any residue or equipment. Commander, this doesn't match any known technology or natural phenomenon I'm aware of. Could it be military, some kind of test? If Denmark's military is testing directed energy weapons on the Greenland ice sheet, they forgot to inform the research station sitting right here. Frost shook his head. And even if it was military, why this pattern? Why a triangle? Ward took more photographs, documenting the mark from every angle. Then he noticed something else. About 30 meters further north, there was another dark patch on the ice. Torres, stay here and continue documentation. Frost, with me. They approached the second mark carefully. It was identical to the first, a perfect triangle, same dimensions, same burned appearance. And beyond it, Ward could see a third mark, and a fourth. There's a pattern, Frost said, pulling up a mapping program on his tablet. He marked the locations of each triangle. They're arranged in a line heading northeast. Spacing is consistent, about 30 meters between each mark. They followed the line of marks, finding 7 in total before the trail ended. Each one identical, each one perfectly placed. The precision was undeniable. At the 7th and final mark, Ward noticed something different. The ice around this triangle was disturbed, not melted, but compressed, as if something heavy had rested there. Frost noticed it too. Impressions in the ice, 3 of them positioned at each point of the triangle. Something was here. Something with weight. He pulled out his measuring tape. Each impression is approximately 40 centimeters in diameter. Depth varies from 2 to 4 centimeters. Landing gear, Ward said quietly. What? 3 points of contact, arranged in a triangle. That's a tripod configuration, landing gear. Frost stared at him. You're suggesting something landed here? Multiple times? Look at the evidence. 7 identical marks arranged in a perfect line. The final one shows weight impressions. What else explains it? 100 other things that don't involve unidentified aircraft landing on the Greenland ice sheet in the middle of the night. Ward understood Frost's resistance. He felt it himself, the desire to find a rational explanation, to avoid the implications of what they were seeing. But the evidence was clear. We need to report this, Ward said. Get command involved. They can send investigators, proper analysis equipment. They made their way back to Torres, collected the samples and equipment, and returned to the station. The entire excursion had taken 3 hours, but Ward felt like they'd crossed into different territory entirely, from the known to the unknown, from explainable to inexplicable. Back in the command center, Ward drafted his report while the evidence was fresh. He included everything: the sensor interference, the electromagnetic spike, the triangular marks, the weight impressions. He attached the photographs, the sensor data, Torres's measurements. He titled it, Anomalous Markings Discovered on Ice Sheet. Investigation Required. Then he encrypted it and sent it through secure channels to Denmark Arctic Command in Nuuk, marking it urgent and requesting immediate guidance. The response came 6 hours later. Ward expected questions. He expected skepticism. He expected orders to conduct further investigation. What he got was something else entirely. The message from Arctic Command was brief, professional, and completely unexpected. Reference, Station 7, report dated 19 Jan 2020. Analysis complete. Markings consistent with meteor impact fragmentation pattern. Ice samples show fusion crust typical of meteoric material. Sensor interference attributed to atmospheric charged particle influx associated with meteor entry. No further investigation required. Amend station log accordingly. Report filed under Natural Phenomena Observation. Arctic Command. Ward read it 3 times, certain he was misunderstanding something. Meteor impact? Fusion crust? He looked at the photographs on his computer screen. The perfect triangles, the precise spacing, the weight impressions. None of that looked like meteor damage. He called Frost to the command center. The geologist read the message and immediately shook his head. "That's wrong, completely wrong. I've studied meteor impacts. They don't make geometric patterns. They don't create identical marks spaced at regular intervals. And they definitely don't leave tripod impression marks." "Maybe we missed something," Ward suggested, not believing it himself. "Maybe there's an explanation we didn't consider." "Commander, I'm looking at the ice samples right now. There's no meteoric material. The composition is just normal ice that's been melted and refrozen. No silicon, no iron, no nickel. None of the elements you'd find in meteor fusion crust." Ward pulled up the electromagnetic data again. "And this? They're saying the EM spike was from charged particles during meteor entry?" "That could cause EM interference," Frost admitted. "But the timing doesn't work. Meteors create brief EM pulses during atmospheric entry. We're talking seconds, maybe a few minutes. Our spike lasted 17 minutes, and it started after the supposed impact, not during." They sat in silence, the implications settling in. Arctic Command wasn't mistaken. They were lying. Or more precisely, they were creating a cover story. "They want us to amend the station log," Ward said quietly. "Officially, record this as meteor impact." "You're not seriously considering that?" "I'm considering the reality of our situation. We report to Arctic Command. They've given us an official explanation. We can accept it, or we can refuse and probably get relieved of duty for insubordination." Frost stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. We have physical evidence. We have data. We can prove—" "Prove what?" Ward interrupted. "That something landed on the ice? That some unidentified craft left geometric burn marks in a perfect line? And what do you think happens then? We get labeled as conspiracy theorists. Our careers get destroyed, the evidence gets classified, and nothing changes. So we just go along with the lie?" Ward wanted to say no, wanted to refuse, to fight, to insist on the truth. But he'd been in the military long enough to recognize when a decision had been made at levels far above his authority. "I'm going to make a call," he said, "to a friend at Arctic Command, see if I can find out what's really going on." He went to his quarters for privacy and placed a secure call to Major Henrik Bertelsen, an old friend from his Afghanistan deployment who now worked in Arctic Command's Operations Division. "Ethan, good to hear from you," Bertelsen answered, "though I'm guessing this isn't a social call. Henrik, what's going on with my report from Station 7? The official response doesn't match our findings." There was a pause. "I can't discuss specifics on an open line. It's a secure line. Doesn't matter. Some things are above my clearance level." Ward felt cold that had nothing to do with the Arctic temperature. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that your report went up the chain very quickly and came back down even faster with very specific instructions. There are people, agencies, that handle certain types of observations. When reports like yours come in, they get diverted to those agencies." "What agencies?" "The kind that don't officially exist, the kind that don't appear on organizational charts." Bertelsen lowered his voice. "Ethan, listen to me carefully. Accept the official explanation, amend your log, move on. Because if you push this, if you make noise about it, you'll find yourself reassigned to a desk job in Copenhagen faster than you can file a protest." "But the evidence—" will disappear. Trust me, I've seen it happen. The samples you collected, they'll get lost in transit. The sensor data will be attributed to equipment malfunction. Your photographs will be dismissed as anomalous ice formations, and you'll be left looking like either incompetent or crazy. Ward absorbed this. So, this has happened before. I can't confirm or deny that, but I can tell you that Denmark is part of various international agreements regarding Arctic phenomena, and some of those agreements involve discretion regarding certain observations. Phenomena. You mean UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena. I've said all I can say. Take the advice, Ethan. You're a good officer. Don't throw your career away over something you can't change. The call ended. Ward sat in his quarters, staring at nothing, trying to process what he'd learned. There were agencies that handled reports like his, organizations that created cover stories, that made evidence disappear, that turned the impossible into the officially mundane. And they were so efficient, so established, that even calling his report unusual had triggered an immediate response, which meant this had happened before, probably many times before. He thought about the marks on the ice, the perfect triangles, the precision. Whatever had created them had technology far beyond current human capabilities, and Denmark, along with other nations, apparently had protocols in place for when such evidence surfaced, protocols that involved burying the truth. Ward returned to the command center where Frost was waiting, agitated and frustrated. "Well," the geologist demanded. "We're going to amend the log," Ward said quietly. "Record it as meteor impact, just as command ordered." "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. We have no choice. We have evidence, which will disappear if we push this. Henrik was very clear. If we fight this, our careers are over and the evidence gets buried anyway. At least this way we stay in position, stay in the field. Maybe document something else in the future." Frost looked like he wanted to argue more, but something in Ward's expression stopped him. "They've done this before, haven't they? Covered things up. That's my impression. And we're just supposed to accept it. Pretend we didn't see what we saw?" Ward walked to the window, looking out at the endless ice sheet. Somewhere out there, 7 marks remained, evidence of something extraordinary, evidence that would officially become a meteor impact, filed away and forgotten. "We're scientists and soldiers," Ward said. "We observe, we document, we report, but we don't control what happens to that information. That's above our pay grade." He turned back to Frost. "But here's what we can do. We keep our own copies of everything. We document it properly, completely, and we store it securely, because someday, maybe, the truth will come out. And when it does, we want to be ready." Frost considered this. "All right, I'll prepare a comprehensive private archive. Everything we found, everything we measured. But, Commander, what do you think they were? Those marks?" Ward thought about the perfect triangles, the regular spacing, the weight impressions at the final mark. He thought about the sensor interference, the electromagnetic spike, the precision of it all. "I think something landed on the ice, multiple times, left marks, then took off again, heading northeast." "But why? What was it doing?" "I don't know. Surveying? Testing? Communicating? We don't have enough information." "Do you think it'll come back?" Ward had been wondering the same thing. The marks were fresh, created sometime around when the sensors failed, which meant whatever had made them had been there less than 24 hours ago. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I'm going to make sure we're watching. Carefully." Over the next hour, Ward amended the station log as ordered. The triangular marks became meteor impact fragmentation pattern. The electromagnetic spike became atmospheric charged particle influx. The sensor interference became temporary equipment sensitivity to EM fluctuations. The impossible became mundane. The unexplained became explained. The truth became officially false. But in a secure, encrypted file on Ward's personal drive, the real documentation remained. Photographs showing perfect geometric patterns. Measurements showing precision far beyond natural phenomena. Data showing coordinated sensor failures and electromagnetic spikes that didn't match the official explanation. Evidence that something had visited the ice sheet. Something with technology and purpose. Something that left marks like a signature, or a warning, or a message humanity wasn't ready to read. 5 days have passed since we discovered the marks. The official report has been filed and accepted. As far as Denmark Arctic Command is concerned, Station 7 observed an interesting meteor impact, and the matter is closed. But I can't close it, not in my mind. Every night I review the photographs. The perfect triangles, the precise spacing, the tripod impressions at the final mark. I've spent 20 years in the military, 12 years in Arctic operations. I've seen meteor impacts, ice formations, equipment failures. What we found doesn't match any of it. Frost has been monitoring the sensors continuously. They returned to normal function approximately 6 hours after we discovered the marks. No explanation for why they started malfunctioning or why they stopped. Just another anomaly we're not allowed to question officially. Dr. Anderson came to me yesterday with something interesting. She'd been reviewing atmospheric data from the night before we found the marks. There was a brief visual anomaly captured by our upward-facing cameras at 1:47 hours on January 19th. A light, not the aurora, not a satellite, not any aircraft she recognized. It appeared for approximately 8 seconds, moving from southwest to northeast, same direction as the line of marks. I asked her not to include it in any official reports. She understood why. The question that haunts me, what was it doing? Why create these marks in such a precise pattern? Why visit Station 7 specifically? Or, perhaps the more disturbing question, how often does this happen? How many other meteor impacts have been observed at Arctic stations? How many other atmospheric phenomena are really something else entirely? I think about Henrik's warning, about the agencies that handle these reports, about the international agreements regarding Arctic phenomena. It suggests a systematic effort to control information about something operating in the polar regions, something that's been observed enough times to require established protocols. That's somehow more unsettling than the marks themselves, because it means we're not alone in seeing these things. Others have witnessed them, documented them, and then watched as the evidence disappeared into classified files. Torres came to me this morning, said she's been having trouble sleeping, keeps thinking about the marks, about what made them. She asked me directly, "Commander, do you think it was not human?" I didn't answer, because officially it was a meteor. Officially there's nothing to worry about. Officially the matter is closed. But between us, between those of us who saw the marks, who measured them, who documented them, we know the truth. We know something was there. Something with technology beyond our understanding. Something that came, marked the ice with geometric precision, and left. And we know that somewhere in some classified facility, in some database we'll never access, there's a record of similar incidents. A pattern of visitations that someone, somewhere is tracking. Maybe that's why they were so quick to provide a cover story. Because acknowledging what we found would require acknowledging all the other times, all the other marks, all the other stations that have seen lights in the Arctic darkness. The ice keeps its secrets. But now I'm part of that secret, and I don't know whether that makes me a privileged observer or just another person forced to stay silent about something humanity deserves to know. What I do know is this. I'm watching the sky now. Every night I check the cameras, monitor the sensors, scan the darkness, because if they came once, they might come again. And if they do, I'll be ready. Not to stop them. I don't think we could even if we tried. But to watch, to document, to understand, if understanding is even possible. The aurora dances overhead tonight, painting the ice in shades of green. Beautiful, natural, explainable. But somewhere out there in the vast darkness beyond our station, beyond our planet, something else dances. Something that leaves perfect triangles burned into ancient ice. Something that watches us as we watch the stars.